Welcome to the Jamal Thomas Morning Show. My name is Jamal Thomas. This is indeed my show. Before I start, I want to do a sound check. Can you guys hear me all right? I'm not going to do this every morning, but I move my mic. I'm trying to get into a better place. Can you guys hear me? No issue, sound, echo, anything like that? The world is good. So far, so good. Let me know if the world is good. I see one person says yes. Greetings from Greece. Well, welcome to the show from Greece. How about everyone else? Everyone else sounds good? I see a thumbs up. Excellent. Excellent. I was trying to remove the profile of the mic. It's like immediately in your face. That's supposed to be 5x5. I didn't hear it 5x5. Oh, you did say 5x5. All right. I hope you guys are doing okay this morning. As I point out, wherever you are, I am happy, glad, ecstatic, over the moon that you are under the sound of this voice, and I appreciate you for being under the sound of this voice. There is big news. I mean, some of it has to do with the humiliation of Donald Trump. It is becoming very clear to me that the information that he's receiving, either he is breathtakingly incompetent and lying through his teeth constantly, which is probably the case. But it also seems to be the case that Donald Trump is not really being given information on reality and information in a way that would allow him to make choices, even being incompetent, better choices. And so he's at one moment after the next at a podium telling people, I didn't hear about that. I didn't hear about that. I didn't hear about that. Now, either he just wasn't told and he didn't hear about that, but at a certain point, it looks like you would get tired of saying, I didn't hear about that. And I think therein lies the issue of this particular, I guess you can call it a monologue. There has been events that have been taking place that have not gotten the news coverage and gravity that it deserves. Now, back in 2019, the Donald Trump administration, Trump himself actually, under the tutelage of John Bolton, pulled out of the 1987 Intermediate Range Nuclear Forces Treaty. I want to get the name right, the acronym right. But what it basically boils down to is there's a certain class of missiles, ground-based, within a certain range that weren't going to be used by the United States or the Soviet Union, and of course, its successor state, Russia. Now, this has been in effect all the way up to 1987. You get up to 2019, John Bolton with this belief that, well, we are a primary nation, we are supremacists on the globe, and any deal or treaty that you make with another country that is not your equal limits your capability as a nation. And so, by definition, he did not want treaties. Donald Trump, under his tutelage, decided to get rid of that treaty in 2019. Russia, kind of like Iran, when they got rid of the JCPOA, stayed with it for several years. That is over. That is over. And as I point out, Intermediate Range Nuclear Forces Treaty. This involves nukes. I also want to point out that Putin, a couple of days ago, pointed out that the Restraint missile is finished being mass produced, or at the very least is now mass produced. And the mass production was successful. And those missiles are going to be deployed. Where? We don't know, but they will be deployed. There's some estimates or even guesses that they're going to be used against Ukraine for testing. And that whatever other class of missiles that Russia deploys will be used in Ukraine for testing for a potential war with Europe. Now, they are making the point of saying, look, you are impinging upon our strategic interests, and we can no longer sit back and allow you to do that. Some of the estimates point out that those missiles may be able to hit California, and this doesn't even touch the nuclear submarines that are lurking through the oceans to allow a first strike. Well, they don't believe in first strike, but to allow a response against U.S. aggression against Russia. In fact, you just had a nuclear submarine show up on the coast of Cuba. Now, they say, well, this is not a threat. Okay, you can say that. But when that went up to the coast, the point was very clear. A about the capabilities of Russia, where these subs may be lurking and what those subs can hit with their weapons, if indeed attacked. So we should be clear about where we are as a world right now. And it doesn't seem like they're taking it seriously. During the Soviet Union era, there was this respect among nations that we both can destroy the world, so let's not destroy the world. So even though we may have provocations, we acknowledge that there's a gravity to the way we interact, and we will act accordingly to not destroy the planet. I don't see that today. I just don't see it. There is a scene in Supernatural. It's a fantastic series. But in one of the scenes, you have, I forget the name of the angel, but he's an archangel. He's trapped by Dean and Sam. And Dean is being an asshole as he talks back and forth to him, engaging him. And the angel, at one point, after being snarky, Dean and Sam wanted to know where God was. They were looking for God. And after a snarky comment by Dean, the angel looks at him with all the love, sadness, and shame in the world and says, "Do you get it, boy? You are living in a godless world." He said, God left. Meaning there is no steady hand on the tiller. There is nothing above that saves you. This is the world to which you have chaos. And in the context of that chaos, anything can take place, especially when you're dealing with people who are effectively sociopaths. The reality of it is, as I point out, there is no steady hand on the tiller. There is nothing that cares. There is nothing that will save you. Anything that happens, happens. If what is taking place in Gaza is not a good indication of that, it should be. The reality of it is, we are skipping through the gates of hell. And it's very possible that we may have to go through the gates of hell for the world to reach some new era of understanding that's assuming there's a world that's left. At the very least, the ground will be here. The cockroaches will be here. Will we? Who knows? You have a president that says he's prepared for nuclear war. Again, that's pretty astonishing. And in the context of the movements that are taking place where the battlefield is being shaped, Russia stuck with that deal probably because they thought at some point the US would get back around to it and rational minds would prevail. And I think with the Ukraine war, what they're realizing is there are no rational minds. Every action that is taking place from the standpoint of pragmatism or good sense is considered to be weakness and only serves to create more provocation from the West. We are not the good guys. And I'm talking about that from the standpoint of the United States and the collective West. We are not the good guys. Let's assume there aren't any good guys. But we damn sure are not. And the actions that we have been taking have been radically provocative. Knocking over Ukraine in and of itself is provocative. Moving NATO to the borders of Russia is provocative. Attacking Iran while you're supposed to be in the middle of fake negotiations with Iran. All of these things are provocative actions. Iran hasn't attacked anybody. Surrounding China in the way that we've been doing, trying to get the Philippines, South Korea, Japan, all of these countries effectively die for the dignity of America. Provocative. Putting troops in China because Taiwan is China is provocative. I'm trying to get across to you that they are moving pieces on a battlefield in preparation for war. And you ask the question of why are they doing this? The US had no issue with China when they thought, well, they're just our manufacturing arm. They had no issue with Russia when they had drunk Boris Yeltsin. They took issue with these countries when these countries started to assert sovereignty, because sovereignty, by definition, runs in contrast to a country that wants to maintain hegemony. This is all about maintaining global control. If we can't play, then I'm going to take my ball and I'm going to go home. And by go home, I mean destroy it all. It is outrageous. And I will tell you something else. Supremacist ideologies are deeply problematic. And the West runs with this idea that it is overtly superior in a way that it can do whatever it wants. And that somehow it's unfounded superiority that it sees when it looks in the mirror and the level of hubris that backs it can justify any particular action with a bit of propaganda behind it in order to make it go down okay for the masses. I will tell you this: Russia's not doing this for no reason. They're moving these pieces in contrast in order to combat strategically what the West has been doing. And we are getting to the brink of oblivion. There's only so many maneuvers that can take place before this becomes kinetic. And when it does, we're talking about the end of days. I'm going to go to my guests. We are joined with, and I can hear him in the background, Warwick Powell. How you doing today, Warwick? You doing all right?
Well, you are.
Thank you, man. And just so the audience would know, Warwick Powell is an adjunct professor at Queensland University, professor working on the intersection of China, digital technologies, supply chains, financial flows, and global political economy and governance. Thank you for joining me again, man. I really appreciate it. In fact, I really appreciated you joining me last time. I learned so much from that conversation. So
it was a lot of fun. I enjoyed it too.
Excellent. Thank you for that. So I got a question for you. I was looking at some of the economic data, and I got to be honest, I didn't fully understand it. Now, some of this you put up yourself, which is why I was eager to bring you back on. This was one of the posts that you put up, and it was pointing to this one. I guess I do understand, but it would be good to get an explanation. The U.S. stock market is driven by a group of huge global tech players whose revenues are 40% global. Economic indicators closer to home tell a more modest story. And just so I can expand this, it says the gap between stock prices and the real U.S. economy has widened. It says outside of the top 10 stocks, S&P 500 forward profit estimates have been flat. Okay, put that in English for us, just so we would understand what we're looking at.
Look, what we're looking at is really two worlds. The first world is the world of the so-called real economy, where many businesses are plying their trade, creating products and services, selling them to customers, and making profits in competitive markets, which of course means that there is constant pressure on their profit margins. On the other hand, we have the stock market, where fluctuations in stock prices is driven, in truth, not so much by fundamentals. Quite clearly, when you look at the rising gap between the performance of companies versus the share prices of a select group of companies. Now, the select group of companies, which are really drawing away from the market at large, are underpinned by a combination of things which makes them quite distinctive. The first thing, of course, is that they're mainly in high technology or new technology areas, artificial intelligence, chip manufacturing, etc., etc. That's one thing. The other thing about these technology plays is that they also are able to secure significant market dominance positions, which enables them to separate themselves a little bit, if you will, from the rest of the marketplace. And thirdly, of course, there's just a huge amount of hype that draws in finance capital into the market, which pushes up prices for those stocks that money capital chases. Now, the money capital that comes into the system is underpinned by growing liquidity overall within the US economy. And unsurprisingly, that's related to the ongoing growth of the net injections of liquidity by government, otherwise known as the federal deficit, rising private sector borrowings where they exist, and of course the new money that is paid to the bigger end of town that owns the majority of government or treasury bonds. And the interest paid on those enables those organizations that hold those bonds to continue to accumulate finance capital that they then channel elsewhere. And one of the places they channel it is clearly into the technology stocks. So essentially what this is telling us is the stock market is heavily financialized, where hot money chases up the price of technology stocks. Technology stocks are outperforming the market at large because they have privileged positions, both in regulatory terms, political terms, and also in terms of their current status within the economy at large. And the third thing this tells us is that the real economy, away from the shining lights of the the sexy stuff, is really actually under a lot of pressure and struggling.
Well, that goes to another post that you put up that I also want to hit right here. This goes to actual incomes and what those incomes can effectively afford because of issues of, I guess, inflation and other pressures. I mean, in the old days, we didn't have, like when people make this allegory of saying, well, back in the 70s, America's had this much purchasing power. Okay, but that didn't postulate healthcare, education, these things that have skyrocketed and that have not caught up with incomes. So right here, spending behind incomes household now 100. So it's pointing out that this flat line here is effectively consumer price index. These two lines are the incomes that Americans effectively spend, let's say average Americans, in regards to what they bring in for cash. And these are the high earners. So we're just breaking even. Am I getting this right?
So what this shows is spending by groups, different income groups, and how they relate to the consumer price index. In other words, the real spending that different groups are undertaking. And we can see from this that those who are doing where there's real growth in consumption expenditure above and beyond the CPI, it's actually in the higher income groups, whereas the middle and lower income groups had a period where they spent more than their growth rate in spending was greater than the CPI. But you can see how that little bubble was literally around the time where there were special transfer payments and checks being distributed during COVID. But at all other times, you'll see that the lower income groups' consumption expenditure growth was below CPI, and we're starting to see the bump that happened during the COVID years taper off. And we know that this is happening also because households have been chewing into significant savings that they also made during that COVID 2 to 3 year period, where household saving rates increased dramatically in the US, and they're basically now back to bare bones. Over 60% of American households report that they live paycheck to paycheck, and that's what this data starts to show again. So the US economy, in terms of consumption expenditure, has not experienced real growth in consumption from the lower and middle income groups. They've largely been keeping track with inflation at best. But all of the gains in consumption growth have been from the higher income groups. The richer folk are literally, we know are getting richer, relative and in absolute terms, and the fact that they can spend substantially more than CPI tells us that.
I'm curious, from the standpoint of what Donald Trump is doing in regards to this kind of tariff war that he's having with, for all intents and purposes, BRICS. I mean, I don't know if he's getting bad data or bad information, but he came to some kind of weird conclusion that India was going to give up sovereignty and just stop trading with Russia. And then India pointed out that, hey, you told us to buy Russian oil on the sly because you wanted to keep the oil economy running. Okay, that's a big exposure, right? You're having this war, you're trying to get Europe to stop buying Russian oil, and yet you're telling India, hey, we need you to buy Russian oil because we want to keep the prices down. I guess, and this is going to go after Brazil, Russia, China, Saudi Arabia, UAE, etc. Apparently Friday, because Russia is not going to give anything to Witkoff unless Witkoff is going to be willing to accept Russian demands. What is that going to do? Because for all intents and purposes, you have many countries, like Russia has a countdown clock. And as Reuters point out, they don't believe that Trump or Putin doesn't believe that these are going to have any kind of potency at all, short of reverberations back to hit the American market, if not the world economy. What should we expect when this ultimatum ends, from your point of view?
Well, I think it's clear that that Russia has come to a view over the course of the last dozen years or so, as it's adjusted to the mounting pile of sanctions and tariffs that have been directed in its direction, that its economic structure and its relationships with other economies in the world has adapted sufficiently now to weather any additional punitive measures thrown at it. So I don't think Russia in and of itself has any deep concerns that what is being talked about, 100% tariffs and those sorts of things, is going to have any material effect. Firstly, because those tariffs aren't directed directly at Russia, they're directed at countries who trade with Russia. I'm also confident that, notwithstanding that, we are getting very clear messaging out of both New Delhi and Beijing that they value their sovereignty and their ability to decide with whom they do business with, that they will not yield to any threat that is directed at them. And they would have made that also very, very clear to the Russian authorities, which means that between them all, they know with absolute confidence that whatever Trump decides to do in the next few days, they're literally going to ride it out. So that's probably the broad picture of it all. What is it going to do? Well, let's say we have 100% tariffs applied to Indian products and possibly services going into the United States, and then let's see if this goes all the way to Chinese products and services as well, which is a totally different league altogether in terms of its volume impact on the United States market. Look, if that was the case, in effect, trade would stop. By and large, tariffs at over 60% would see trade more or less stop, other than for things where there are no substitutes at all. So the United States will, in effect, cease purchasing things from India and China. Their exporters and their industries will have to adjust and adapt to that. But at the same time, so too will the US. And what that will mean is that the US will need to find alternatives to these supplying countries. Textbook economics, which is, of course, premised on fantastical assumptions, would imply that that companies can just flip a switch and change suppliers. Real world supply chains, particularly international ones, simply don't work like that. It will take months for adjustments to be made, for new suppliers to be identified, for contracts to be secured, for due diligence to be undertaken, for compliance checking to be completed, so that goods that are destined for the United States market can actually go through customs. Now, they will all come from places that have tariffs imposed on them as well, don't forget. Right? So there's no escaping tariffs. The United States policy strategy or regime or thought process, framework, whatever we call it, is in effect to apply tariffs on all trading nations that the United States deals with. So this is what's going to happen, and that will, of course, lead to supply chain shocks. Supply chain shocks invariably result in upward price pressure, inflation, as well as shortage of goods. So we'll then see a material impact as well, not just a price impact, but a material impact, because as inputs in particular come into a situation of relative shortage, the downstream companies are affected too, because they're waiting on the inputs to arrive so that they can produce the things that they produce. Let's not forget that about 40% of American imports from China is actually intermediate goods. So these are goods used in production processes in the United States. They're not end consumer goods. So not only will American households be affected, but American enterprises will be affected, which will then feed on to affecting American households.
Recently, and thank you for that great explanation of that. Recently, there was a job report that came out. There was a correction, let's say, to the job report. Trump didn't like the correction, fired the head of that organization, or the person who effectively did the numbers. Now, the correction was, here's it right here. This is a graph of that correction where Donald Trump came out and says, well, I don't believe the numbers. And I think it's a Biden appointee. What he didn't like is effectively that the correction showed, I think it was like 800,000 jobs less than what was put out. So, Ray, U.S. economic data increasingly has the whiff of stagflation. Now, I have been saying that we are headed for stagflation for a while. My reasoning, and again, not an economist, so correct me if I'm wrong. Inflation is one. You have a depreciation of the dollar. Two, the tariffs, which Americans are going to have to pay at the stores. Three, so you're talking about a depreciation of the amount of income that Americans have on a daily basis as they operate. And then add to that, I don't believe that we're going to get out of this tariff war untouched. And early on, it seems like we were economically going down, and all of the forecasts was talking about a recession. So it says today the ISM services report showed little growth, but business reported that prices paid rose the fastest pace since October. So Americans are paying more, but businesses are not necessarily growing in a way where incomes or anything else would grow.
Yeah.
Am I getting this wrong?
Yeah, look, all the ingredients are pointing to a pretty rough period coming up with rising unemployment, reduced real incomes as a result of rising prices, and which are stagflationary conditions. You know, this is a real concern, I think, for middle and mainstream America, as well as working families in America, because, as I mentioned earlier, over 60% of American households already live paycheck to paycheck. And there are some other very important statistics about the perilous nature or the precarious nature of work and life in America at the moment. You know, when over 20% of households are skipping meals already to pay rent or mortgages. 13% of households, or 12.9% of households, are estimated to experience food insecurity. You know, imagine that. You know, almost 13% of American households in 2024, an increase on the year before, I might add, are now experiencing insufficient food to put on the table. We know the debt situation in terms of personal debt, the growth in buy now, pay later schemes, credit card delinquency rates, you know, where interest rates are in the low 20% range already. And I think the real risk now that we're staring at is American households are falling over the edge. I think we also saw some data in the last 24 hours from the PMI, which indicated a drop in orders, as well as data showing a fall in consumption overall, consumption expenditure. And I think you just touched on the rising purchasing prices being paid by enterprises. None of this speaks of a strong restructure of the economy in a jobs growth trajectory. It's very, very tough structural times at the moment, I think.
What is Trump missing? He's obviously missing something. Like there's some either he's obviously missing something. Like it's something about the economy that is not connecting to him, where the American public is now seeing this for what it is. I mean, before Trump got elected, they would have thought he's a businessman and he will do great things for the economy. And that tanked the moment that he got into office. Why does he? Oh, please, no, answer.
I think it's a really great question, right? Because when these policies have been enacted, and many people have spoken, you know, before they came into existence, you know, the people were concerned about them and they were all dismissed. And the people who've been concerned about these policies are actually quite diverse, you know, from very mainstream neoclassical economists all the way through to heterodox economics commentators, all of whom have raised in their own different ways concerns about particularly the employment effects of these particular policies and the impacts on real living standards through inflation. And yet all of these concerns have been dismissed, and you do have to wonder why. And look, I think that President Trump actually does have a deep belief in the power of tariffs as the centerpiece of economic rejuvenation strategy, and deep belief. And what that means is that we tend to think that whatever pain needs to be experienced in the short term is worth it because going to open the pathway to the rejuvenation that is being promised. The problem at the moment is that we're getting actually quite conflicting views even out of the White House. So on the one hand, we have comments about the chairman of the Federal Reserve, how he should reduce interest rates. And the argument is that it should reduce them to give the economy a boost along, okay? On the other hand, you have labour market data adjusted, which shows that the economy's actually in a pretty weak or perilous position, which actually strengthens the argument in conventional terms for an interest rates cut. But the president doesn't like those numbers and wants, in a sense, to reverse the numbers almost. Now, with those higher employment numbers, the Fed has less reasons within the Fed's own reasoning to drop interest rates. So you can't actually have it both ways. You can't have a demand for the Fed to drop interest rates and at the same time bemoan the fact that the labour market is no good, right? You know, so we're getting very conflicting messages out of the White House. We also have very odd things, right? Odd comments and views about this idea of revenue generation as if that means anything. So the talk is tariff revenues are rising substantially. Well, of course they will, because you've increased the price. This is what happens. But we need to actually understand what that means. If you think of government as a household or as a business, increased revenue is seen to be a good thing. But government is actually not a business and it's not a household. The government is in a position, firstly, to create its own currency, which is what it does. And so it's actually in the business of managing liquidity in the system. And it does that essentially by having a drain and a tap, right? So just think of it as an ability to turn on the faucet bigger, let more liquidity into the system, but on the other side, control the plug that lets liquidity drain out. And the aim is to make sure that the liquidity doesn't overflow, right? The economic system. So the economic system can absorb so much liquidity because it can produce so much, it can employ so many resources, it's got so much productivity, etc., etc. And too much liquidity basically does drive inflation, assuming that you've hit full employment. But other than that, what you're trying to do is control liquidity in, which you need to turn the wheels, and control liquidity out to make sure that the system doesn't overflow. And taxes is actually the way in which the government pulls the plug and lets liquidity drain out of the system. So once taxes are paid to the general account of the government, of Treasury, that liquidity disappears out of the system. It's gone. And when that liquidity is paid by enterprises and households, and it's no longer circulating in the system, unless that's replaced by more liquidity, the system actually has less liquidity churning through it. And when you've got less liquidity churning through it, you've actually got less aggregate profit potential as well, either for enterprises or for household income growth. And that's what's going on at the moment. I think we're starting to see the effects of liquidity drainage. He's trying to offset that, of course, by boosting government spending. Right? So this is what's going on. You're trying to boost government spending and drain liquidity with the tariffs. You know, we'll see how this plays out over the next 12, 18 months, because a bit's going to depend on how strongly he holds to the talk concerning India and China and other BRICS nations, probably Brazil, I guess. You know, the Russian stuff is just hypocrisy, right? It's actually not massive at all. It's just hypocrisy. Palladium, uranium, and fertilizer. You know, the United States buys those three things from Russia, but it doesn't want anyone else to. It wants to punish everyone else for trading with Russia. You know, it no longer has a credible leg to stand on.
Yeah, I don't get the sense that any of these countries are going to accept that premise. I mean, hey, from your take, why didn't all of these countries band together? And I mean, the world band together. Europe they're vassals, so fair enough. They want daddy to stay in their life. But if you're talking about Thailand, Cambodia, Malaysia, just any random country around the globe where Donald Trump with this kind of random tax, or random, let's say, tariff? Why didn't they just lump together and say, okay, we're not doing this?
Well, you've got to remember that the tariffs that that have been imposed on the products from other countries is a decision made by the US president, not by the other countries. Right. So whether they agree
I see what you mean.
whether they
I do
agree
accept
to
that.
is largely irrelevant. Right. So the first thing is that the president exercised emergency services powers. Essentially, he declared an economic emergency, which enabled him to implement through executive powers these policies, rather than these policies, revenue measures, having to be approved by Congress and the Senate. So the president used executive powers to do this. In other words, they're unilateral. The idea that they were deals, in a sense, is a bit by the by. The argument is that he wanted to increase American product access to markets, right? From the point of view of most of these other countries, whether or not there are tariffs on American imports is, other than probably in agricultural products, where a lot of these countries still have significant parts of their economic base, employment, families, regions, and those sorts of things. Lower tariffs really makes no difference to them in any substantial structural sense. And in fact, it could actually be of substantial benefit. So I'll give you an example. A country that exports to the United States electronic goods, Philippines, Vietnam, Malaysia, Indonesia, they all export reasonable amounts of electronic products. And so they will be tariffed by the United States. For those electronic products to be manufactured, these countries or the companies import things like semiconductors. They import them from places like the United States. And we know that because the trade data shows that companies in these countries buy semiconductors from the United States. So they buy semiconductors, they assemble electronic goods, and then they ship finished electronic goods to the United States. Drop tariffs on the semiconductors, so they come in actually cheaper. So we reduce the operating costs for businesses. They export these goods to the United States puts a tariff on them. If the United States wants to increase its exports of things like semiconductors to these countries, which is clearly what it wants to do, at some point the United States is going to have to buy more finished electronic goods from these countries to justify these companies importing the American semiconductors. Now, what's going to happen with that? Well, the value of finished electronic goods is higher than the value of semiconductors. And so the balance of trade, which the United States is obsessed with at the moment, is actually going to worsen.
Wait, I'm confused. All right.
Think about it like this. You're going to make expensive electronic goods for me. You're going to make computers, right?
Right. Philippines. I'm the Philippines.
You're the Philippines.
I'm
the United States. You're going to make computers for me. To make the computers for me, you need to buy from me semiconductors.
Okay.
So you're going to buy more semiconductors from me so long as you can sell more computers. Otherwise, why would you buy them? Right. So you'll need to sell them. Right. Yeah, so you'll buy semiconductors from me at $1. You'll sell computers to me at $5. You'll sell more computers to me at $5, so that you can buy more semiconductors from me for $1.
But now the US has effectively said, I'm putting let's say, 30% tariff.
And then we'll put a tariff on that, so we're going to add 30% on the $5. I mean, this is the sort of, you've got to think of economic systems as circular flows, right? Of money going in one direction, and then things going in the other. And of course, as they get assembled, they flow back the other way. So, and once you can sort of visualize these systems of flow and transformations, you start to think that this obsession with financial balances, in a sense, misses the bigger story. And the bigger story really is whether or not you are building capacity in your economic system to be able to, create more things. And the money balances in many regards is the sort of consequence of things rather than the driver of things. So it's a very counterproductive move, because the hope is that if I made it expensive enough, instead of you shipping finished computers to me, you'll come over to where I am and build a new factory. That's the idea, is that at some point you go, oh, look, we'll, you know, because my consumers aren't buying as many because the tariffs are high, you'll then set up a factory behind the tariff wall and then sell to the consumers again. Now, making those sorts of decisions take quite a lot of deliberation, especially in an environment of considerable uncertainty. And the president has created an environment of incredible uncertainty. Who is going to make capital investment decisions about building new factories, establishing new production lines, investing in training and recruiting and training new workers, creating new supply chain systems, etc., when it's entirely possible that by November next year, after the midterms, the political environment will change in the United States, and by January 2029, there'll be another president anyway. So a lot of firms, I suspect, are just going to ride this out. So we're not going to see a bump in significant investment to build new factories and things like that in the United States. Literally, enterprises will try and ride this out.
Yeah, that's why this didn't make sense to me. Because when Donald, I understood, let's say, the underlying logic of what Trump was claiming he was trying to do. It just didn't make sense in practice. I'm going to increase the cost on Americans because I want Americans to be able to, I want those jobs. Basically, I want to create a job that an American, where they can support an American income. So let's say T-shirts. Okay, well, I can't have a T-shirt factory in America because China can make T-shirts for, let's say, 20 cents or 5 cents. So they can pay their workers $5 and they can make that work in regards to business. Well, we can't do that in America. We need at least $15 an hour. So if I increase the cost on T-shirts, where the company can now support paying an American $15 an hour, then now I can build a T-shirt factory in America. Yeah, it sucks for the American that has to now pay $20 or $30 for that T-shirt. But hey, we built the job in America building T-shirts. Now, some people would say, okay, that's insane. I was paying $5 for the T-shirt, but then I have to pay $30 for that T-shirt. Is that really a better outcome? Does it seem like that's what he was trying to do? And I'm using T-shirts just as an allegory, but you can use any business.
But here's the thing with modern manufacturing, and we've heard the Commerce Secretary talk about this in terms of attracting Apple to manufacture phones in the United States, and he himself has described the vision, which is a highly automated assembly facility.
Yes.
So in a sense, there is an acknowledgement that any rejuvenation, if you will, of manufacturing will create manufacturing that won't look like the manufacturing that many people have in their imagination. It's certainly not going to bring the jobs back to the Appalachians or to the Rust Belt in the way that people thought they were. And the workers that are needed for the new kinds of jobs have skills and education levels that are quite different to the workers who've been displaced. So you're not really going to get a very good match anyway. But if you were to build these factories, the United States would need to import a substantial amount of capital equipment in the first instance. So paradoxically, from a system-wide point of view, if the United States was going to try to build out a whole new ecosystem of automated manufacturing capability, it will need to import almost all of the equipment, either from China, where it is abundant and arguably the lowest prices in the world, or from other countries such as Japan, Korea, Switzerland, Germany, which also make precision equipment and machines and robots, but they're more expensive. So one way or another, the United States actually will need to import a lot more things before it's in a position to make more things.
Basically, it makes no sense either way you look at it. Like, the companies are not going to come back within a 4-year term because it will take years for them to reestablish themselves in the U.S. And B, it's more expensive to do it.
Yeah,
They're not.
and look, I'd also say this, that if a nation like the United States, which is an advanced economy, is concerned about the changing structure of the global economy and how it's affecting its own structure and its employment base and things like that. In some ways, at the moment, its reflex has been to turn to nostalgia, right? And nostalgia plays well politically, but it will at some point need to think a lot harder about what the jobs of the future looks like. Right? So these are the jobs that are associated with heavily automated, highly robotized production systems, where science, technology, mathematics, engineering, design play a greater role in the creation of economic value. And that's going to be, I think, the real challenge, because those sorts of jobs then require a substantial reinvestment in the human capital of the population and a shift in its public culture, which is to recognize the value of education. And in recent years, for lots of different reasons, the value of an education has been substantially diminished in the eyes of many people in the community. So there is, I think, a very complex and difficult politics of education that needs to then be confronted. Education at the moment seems to me to have been caught up in a whole range of issues, I guess broadly speaking, around the sort of culture wars and those sorts of things. Whereas at some point, the discussion about education policy is going to need to focus on building a culture that values well-educated people, as opposed to viewing them as a threat to common sense, right? So when you have a political culture that eulogizes ignorance and encourages people to reject expertise and creates doubts around, bodies of knowledge that people have spent a lot of time thinking about, then we end up with the kind of problems that we have. That's not to say, of course, that a functioning society should just accept views of experts without the kinds of questions that many people have. But if in the end, the institutions of expertise that come from education, research, and these sorts of bodies, if those institutions are totally destroyed from a trust point of view, then it's almost impossible to drive a population education and training program that's necessary to create the capability in the society to take advantage of the jobs of the future.
Well, also add in $50,000 on the back of an 18-year-old. That is outrageous.
Well, it doesn't work, right? So
Yeah.
this is the thing, right? So when somebody comes into the workforce, and we see all this data now, so for over the last 20 years, the immiseration of individuals and households through a plethora of debt products, basically, essentially has somebody on the back foot for the first 20 years of their life, where you're paying your college debts, you've got credit card debts, you've got car debts, you aren't making enough to even pay rent, you're never going to get a deposit, and everything's getting further and further out of reach. Now, that first chart that you showed today tells that story, because what that shows is that the spending capacity, in effect, of the majority of American households has barely kept pace with inflation. They aren't getting ahead. They can't get ahead. And one of the big areas of inflation that's actually not included in the CPI numbers is the cost of housing. Right? So housing asset prices are rising, or have been rising, which makes housing very unaffordable. And housing costs are rising faster than real wages growth. So you're never catching up.
I am super curious on your take on something. Have you ever read the book called In Times by, I think it's Peter Turchin? his person's name? He
End
goes,
Times.
yes.
Yeah. I haven't read the book, but I have read a little bit around the book, and I've actually done quite a bit of work in this sort of end of times eschatology sort of space, and it's an interesting part of the American political culture, actually, this idea of end times.
What do you mean? I don't mean in a religious sense. I mean in a.
Well, it actually appears in both senses, right? So the idea of apocalypse, of course, does have deeply non-secular meanings,
Yes.
but this idea also, I think, permeates the more secular dimensions of American political culture as well, and it particularly manifests itself in this sense of a destiny and civilization that's not necessarily deeply religious per se, but nonetheless pictures America in particular as the vanguard of all that is right and good in a last-ditch battle against all that is evil. Whether it's the communists of China or whatever, or what have you. And I think we start to see both the religious and the secular dimensions of apocalyptic culture, if you will, become quite an active ingredient in the current in our current period of time.
I guess I look at this and I don't see a way out. Like, the book kind of makes the point that when you have too many elites in a society, there's a wealth pump where they are effectively extracting resources from the masses to them. So the wealth and the elites get richer, where everyone else gets poorer, where you effectively create a population that is alienated and immiserated from the political structure, where they get to the point of starting to hate that political structure and they get very angry at it. And you get other elites that want to move in to being in that class. They can't move into that class and is able to harness let's say, the anger and the immiseration of the masses in order to destroy the political scene. Basically, you're talking about a cataclysm in regards to political affairs. And they go back over like 1,000 years of history, pointing to government after government after government, where they fell into the exact same trap and ended up in the exact same place. And in the conversation that we're having, all of these signs just show up one after the next, after the next. And, there's this other point where they point out, like, back during FDR's era, there was a capability of being able to change the political space in order to, let's say, curb the immiseration of the working class in a way that headed off the worst aspects of it. Kind of, as opposed to being like Russia, we had this kind of communist takeover. It wasn't that way in America. You had communists, you had socialists, all of these people pushing on the president, and they made changes. That's not here now.
No, and look, this over the course of the long history, of course, there have been large groups of people who've been immiserated, and smaller groups of people have expropriated value and wealth from them, whether they were landlords or whether they were capital owning classes. And of course, inside capital owning classes, you've got different types as well. And I think today we have an environment where finance capital and technology capital are particularly dominant, especially in the United States. And I guess one of the really interesting things from where I sit is, as you mentioned, in times past, political pressure was built up in a system that ultimately responded by taking the rough edges off of capitalism. And then in the post-war period, Second World War period, we had about 20 years, and I think we've discussed this before, of that growth of 1950 to 1970, say, where the inequality in the society narrowed quite substantially, and we experienced this idea of this new middle class. Now, since the mid-70s or thereabouts to now, the patterns of income and wealth distribution in many ways have reverted back to the way that they were before. And most of the gains in real terms that were achieved in that 1930 to 1970 period, say, whether it was FDR or the Great Society programs and, you know, those sorts of things, you know, those ambitious programs of social and economic development, all of that's gone. And we've had a 40 to 50 year experiment that was, in a sense, embodied by Thatcher and Reagan and others like that, that has led to the present circumstance where we have had for about 40 to 50 years no real wages growth for the bottom 50% of American income earners. None. There's been no real wages growth, barely kept up with inflation. And that's official as well. Probably gone backwards in terms of the real experiences of inflation as opposed to the official numbers. We have an increased concentration of ownership of capital. There's a plethora of studies which show that across every industry over the period 1970 to today, we have seen a growing concentration of ownership. It happened quicker in manufacturing, much of which happened in the 70s and 80s, but eventually it fed over into other industries. One of the reasons why the technology industry is so powerful today is that, in fact, a very small number of them control just about all the key gatekeeper positions in that sector. We have had a concentration of ownership in publicly listed stocks. So today, about 93% of New York Stock Exchange market capitalization value is owned by 10% of Americans. And of that, half is owned by 1%. That's data from the Fed. We've seen the immersion in the last 15 years of housing becoming an asset class owned by the investment class now. So prior to the global financial crisis, the world of investment funds didn't really come to pay a visit on the private residential market. But after the financial crisis, when values were impaired, people couldn't pay mortgages, they walked out, they walked away, put the key under the door. A lot of those dwellings were mopped up by investment funds, and now they are landlords. So we now have, for the first time in American history, an institutionalized landlord class as well. So factories, the ownership of factories in a smaller number of hands, the ownership of stocks in a smaller number of hands, the ownership of housing in a smaller number of hands. None of this is going to help in tackling the problems that Donald Trump, in a sense, rode to the White House on. And in fact, these are the very causes of the problems that made it possible for Donald Trump to be politically successful. But I can't see this particular generation of political elites being willing to tackle the systemic ownership inequalities that that currently beset America.
Yeah, that's tragic because, as the book points out, it is inevitable as gravity. At a certain point.
Then the next question I have, and I don't know the answer to this, is the demographic and spatial distribution of the alienation. Okay, so will it become more widespread? Will it become concentrated in particular groups that are spatially concentrated? Because all of this matters, because if it's spread thin across the whole country, then it's hard for the political energies to form. But if it's concentrated geographically and demographically, then it has the real potential to congeal and then create a holding pattern, a political force that can actually hold together. President Trump's campaign through his MAGA movement has achieved that, but I don't sense that it is necessarily stabilized, in that MAGA itself is a coalition of a number of different cohorts that are actually not entirely aligned on everything. And in fact, there are conflicts, very clear conflicts between different cohorts within the MAGA demographic base.
Yeah.
And they're becoming clearer. So it was temporarily pulled together as a political force, and it is still incredibly forceful, but I'm not convinced now, and for some of the reasons that you touched on, actually, that the turn on Russia, the failure around bringing the Ukraine conflict to an end, that's a very different position to the one that many folk in the MAGA movement voted for.
Mhm.
But it's certainly the view of the neocons that have dominated the traditional foundations of the Republican political elite. So they're clearly starting to regain some influence. And President Trump, I think, is yielding quite a bit to that growing influence, whether it's from Lindsey Graham or the others. And so holding those political energies together are quite challenging. So if the things we've been talking about continue unfolding the way that I think we both suspect that they will the conditions enable new forces to, in a sense, bring the politics of anger and anxiety and disappointment and all those things together into a new movement, especially one that is needed if the Trump regime ultimately leads to further disappointment?
That is the question. That is the question. Warwick Powell, man, fantastic breakdown. I was looking at the comments in the audience, like Warwick is the man. They love you and they love your breakdowns. Thank you for this. Warwick Powell, he's an adjunct professor at Queensland University, professor working at the injunction or the intersection between China, digital technology, supply chains, financial flows, and global politics, economy, and governance. Warwick, you have a fantastic night. Thank you for this. I really appreciate it.
Absolute pleasure, Jamal.
Bye-bye. All right. Let's go to our next guest. He was waiting patiently, and I appreciate him for doing so. You sent me the bio that you wanted me to read, so I'm not going to read the one that I had at my disposal. I'm going to read the one that you sent me. We are joined with Justin Podur, host of Anti-Empire Project podcast and YouTube channel. I just want to make sure I got the last name correct. Podur?
Yeah. I allow many different pronunciations. I usually say Podur, but
Podur. Okay.
Yeah.
Fair enough. People butcher my name also, so I totally understand that. I always try to get it right. Even
my parents are from Kerala, and
where's Kerala?
Kerala's a state in southern India, and Thomas is one of the most popular last names in Kerala for Christians.
Is it? Fair enough.
I know a lot of people named Thomas. People in my family named Thomas.
When I'm in like a Muslim country, they would say something like I'm from Egypt, and they would hear Jamal, and they would be like, "Oh, Jamal!" Like, and it's like, but I put an R in the name. Well, my mom put an R in it, and so they're like, "Why is that R?" It's like in America, we don't need much to just go with it. But thank you for joining me, man. I really appreciate you joining me in this.
Oh no, it's my pleasure. I watch your show all the time. All the time I watch this.
Do you? Kisses on the ego are always appreciated. Always appreciated. So this news broke. And from my point of view, it was a no duh, but apparently some people are surprised that they are now ripping the face off of, ripping the mask off. Netanyahu decides on full occupation of the Gaza Strip, IDF activity in the area with hostages, PMO says. Now, they have been angling for this. And my argument has been that is exactly what they've been wanting to do from the entire time. And you can tell just by the way, when you're blowing up hospitals, schools, buildings, when you're taking down apartment complexes, you're sticking dynamite to like entire blocks and then blowing it up. You're trying to create a space where there's nothing there. Mm-hmm. And you do it almost in this kind of robotic, strategic way. And then you get to the point where it's like, okay, well, we're going to make these barricades, these barriers, and we're going to make people get closer in a pin. of sorts. Okay, you're angling for something. That's not random. And you get all of these Israelis coming out saying, well, we don't know why Netanyahu is doing this. Why is Netanyahu doing this? Why doesn't Netanyahu end the war? And it's like, what are you not seeing in this process? Like, it was weird to me that they seemed befuddled by what was taking place. They were trying to get rid of the population of Gaza. And if they had to kill or evacuate, they were willing to do either of those things. Give me your take on this. Or am I getting this wrong? Do I not see this clearly?
Yeah, I don't know that it's that so much that they have been planning to do this as they have been doing this. And what I mean is like there's no part of Gaza that's been not bombed, right? There's no part of Gaza where, I mean, Israeli troops have also been everywhere in Gaza. They've been in every neighborhood, they've been in every hospital, they've been in every school, they've been in every church. They've been everywhere. They've been on every square inch of Gaza, murdering, raping, pillaging, and destroying everything. So what this announcement means, like if you think about the very beginning, October 7th, 8th, 2023,
right?
Netanyahu said, we're going to kill everybody. He referenced a book of Joshua, a Bible story, and he said, this is Amalek, and we're going to kill everybody. Yeah. And so did his defense minister, and so did his foreign minister. And Israel Katz has been saying the same thing now, the guy who replaced the previous ICC fugitive. So if you think about what they were saying from the beginning, we're basically going for extermination. And then Netanyahu announcing with great fanfare that we're going for occupation. That's actually a step down. Like, so this announcement to me is there's some kind of psychological effect that it's intended to have. As far as the ground, what's going on the ground, it doesn't change anything on the ground. The issues on the ground are the state of the Israeli army, which is rather bad, and which is why Netanyahu's received some pushback for this from the army for this announcement. The issue on the ground from the Palestinian perspective is that the entire Gaza Strip is a free fire zone, which means the Israelis bomb everywhere. They designate zones as safe. They announce safe zones and bomb those. All the crossings are closed. So none of that is going to change. There's no prospect in the short term of the people of Gaza getting air defense nor of Israel opening the crossings. So what exactly is Netanyahu talking about when he says, I'm going to occupy Gaza? I mean, he's basically announcing something political. He's basically trying to say there's not going to be any end to this conflict through a ceasefire. And when he says, I'm going to operate in zones where the hostages are, which they've also done, they've killed many of the hostages by bombing them. He's basically trying to get the Israeli society more and more used to the idea that all the hostages are going to die. And all the hostages are going to die as the price of the Israeli plan to kill all the people of Gaza. So the announcement of occupation is not what it sounds like. This is basically a kind of a political maneuver to prime Israeli society for basically the loss of all the hostages, the absence of a ceasefire negotiation for the foreseeable future. And the truth about that is also that it doesn't really matter what he says, because if there's sufficient pressure for a ceasefire, then he'll accept a ceasefire too. If there's sufficient pressure, if the Israeli army collapses, he's not going to be able to occupy Gaza anyway. So this is one of the points that I'm always trying to make on my channel, which is you don't watch what they say, you watch what's happening on the battlefield. And the battlefield is what will determine what happens here, not Netanyahu's announcement of occupation. That doesn't mean things that politicians like him say don't matter. It just means you have to read it a little bit differently. This whether he can occupy Gaza, whether they can exterminate everybody in Gaza, that all depends on what the resistance always calls the bigger equation, right? The correlation of forces.
How do you see this in a grand, let's say zooming out of Gaza for a moment, because after October 7th, they're using it to justify pretty much every atrocity that they commit. And whether this is attacking Lebanon, whether this is attacking Syria, whether this is attacking the West Bank, I mean, because you have settlers effectively killing people in the West Bank. Nobody talks about it, but video after video after video shows it. Harvesting organs, apparently rapes. I mean, they've used October 7th to justify what is, for all intents and purposes, just expansion into trying to create this greater Israel. And I guess there are two questions with this. First, do you think it is possible for them to accomplish their objectives in Gaza, which is, again, either extermination or evacuation? Effectively, we need to get these people out, or we need to kill them all. Because I don't see another option in this. It's not like they're accepting a two-state solution. And from the Israeli point of view, a two-state solution is a no-go. I've spoken to Netanyahu's, he was Netanyahu's former press secretary. And
Sorry to hear
it was
that.
a no-go. Yeah. It's like a one-state solution is off the table and the two-state solution is impossible. So it's like, okay, so what do you have? You have either execution of everybody, just murder, or evacuation.
It's what they want. It's what they want. Is it possible? Yeah. It's possible. I didn't like, I've been humbled the past couple of years because I didn't think I was talking to a fellow activist yesterday about this, because he was saying something not about exactly what you say, but he was saying something like, well, that's just impossible. That'll never happen, kind of thing. And I replied to him, I said, yeah, I didn't think this world we're living in right now was possible. So we are living in a time of like completely unthinkable. But what they want and what they get are always different, because what they want is whatever fantastical scenario they dream up from their most genocidal fantasies, and that's part of the world they live in now. They live in this world where everything that they want is given to them, and all they can seem to think of to do is more and more murder and more atrocities. Whatever, that's what they want. But when you say things like it's a no-go for Netanyahu and it's a no-go for Israelis, I don't think that's like, I remember reading Malcolm X, one of Malcolm X's interviews, and he had this idea, right, that America was going to that they were going to partition America, and that they would be part of America that was given over to the black nation, right? And they said to him, like, why would the establishment of America give that to you? And he said it's the circumstances in which a person is when you make that request, right? So right now they're in a situation where every horrific fantasy of theirs is coming true, but the point of resistance is to change those circumstances. So what's a no-go now will not be a no-go under different circumstances. And if you think, again, in October they were saying, remember what Amalek did to you, blah blah blah. In November they had a ceasefire. In November they had a ceasefire. They had a hostage exchange. They were releasing prisoners. They did it again in January of the following year. So they say things that they then contradict all the time, and it just depends on a politician like Netanyahu is someone who lies, first of all, someone who says one thing and does another, and also someone who reads carefully the situation that they're in and takes whatever decision is of maximal benefit to them. And so, things that
But they
are a
never,
no-go are not always a no-go. Yeah.
but they never believed in those things. It's kind of like Joe Biden saying, "Hey, I'm doing everything in my power to end the war." When Joe
Mm,
Biden wasn't doing anything to end the war, it's just what you said. We need to
yeah.
rearm, we need to reload, we need to go from point A to point B, we need to help Trump in the election. So
Yeah.
we will say this, knowing full well that under no circumstances did they mean it. It's just what he said. It's not
I
what he meant.
think I think my rebuttal to that would just be like each of the times that Israel has gone for a ceasefire in the past 2 years of warring with everybody, Lebanon, Iran, and twice in Gaza. They said up until the ceasefire that they were never going to have a ceasefire. They were going to destroy Hezbollah. They were going to destroy Iran, regime change Iran, and they're going to exterminate everybody in Gaza. And then suddenly one day it's announced there's a ceasefire. Is it is the ceasefire what they want? No, but they calculate in the Iran case, they calculated that they would keep getting hit with missiles that they didn't like. In the Lebanon case, they calculated that they would be losing soldiers at a rate in Lebanon that they didn't want to have to do. And with Gaza, it's the same thing. It was they basically calculated somewhere around the morale of their army, the loss of equipment, all of this is wearing them down, and they calculated that they couldn't accomplish those objectives. And that's again Netanyahu's announcement yesterday or the day before. He's trying. It's pretty clear what he's trying to do is remove the hostages from consideration. So if there was any restraint, if there was any pressure for a ceasefire from the resistance holding these prisoners of war, Netanyahu wants to get Israeli society ready to accept that all of those are going to die. Right. And that, I think, is how he's trying to change the equation right now. That's I think the point of what he's doing here. But again, maybe that'll work. Israeli society is pretty far gone, but there are also consequences to being a society that's so far gone that I don't believe that we've seen yet. So if you're a society that's willing to say any prisoner, any military soldier who gets taken prisoner is going to be written off as dead. We don't allow our soldiers to be taken prisoner, and we don't do prisoner swaps. Well, that's going to be I think medium term that's going to be a consideration for Israeli soldiers signing up. It has to be. My comrades are not going to rescue me. My comrades are going to shoot me in the back or bomb me if we get into situations. If the resistance can then adapt their tactics to threaten to capture people and get the Israelis to kill those people for them. There's a lot of things that Israelis are doing now that defy every kind of military and economic logic. And right now it's working out for them. But it's working out for them partly because it's so shocking to everybody that all of these things could be abandoned all at once. The laws of war, the international law, the concept of humanitarian aid, diplomacy, all of these violations are so shocking to everybody, whether it's the resistance or the rest of the world, that everybody's kind of immobilized right now. Everybody's kind of like immobilized and frozen. But like when you get used to that world and you say, okay, these people lie all the time. These people cannot be believed no matter what they're saying. If they say the sky is blue, you have to check. If they say, mammals breathe air, you have to check that. So, if you say once you realize there's no deal, there's no covenant, there's no agreement that these people will enter into that they will honor, that also will change the way you approach deals. If you say these people, if you understand that these people, this army, this society is willing to murder its own soldiers, murder its own civilians in order to gain some kind of advantage over the enemy, that also is something, while shocking at first, a resistance movement that understands that about their enemy can use that to their advantage. So there's a period now of people being frozen and shocked and stunned at this depravity. But I do think that once everybody kind of adjusts to the fact that our leaders and the Israelis are actually work this way, it's not going to be it's not a durable advantage. I don't think it's not like like China has built this industrial base. You can't catch up to China now,
Right.
But it's not a trick. It's an accumulation of work and labor and thinking over decades. And the pager attack or these assassination campaigns in Iran, those are tricks. It's not the same as some kind of durable advantage. So when you're on to the trick, you can adjust. I don't know how. In Iran's case, it's fairly obvious what they have to do. They have to root out traitors and catch the Mossad cells and things like that. But with Lebanon, it's more difficult to imagine how they can rebuild their communication systems under this total surveillance. And in Gaza, obviously, the priority is survival right now.
Yeah, it's like a tactic of depravity.
Yeah,
it's not a strategic.
That's right.
advantage.
That's what I'm saying. That's the point I'm making.
Yeah. No, I do get that. But it started with a tactic of depravity. I mean, the Hannibal Directive was in a play on October 7th. I mean, we don't know how many people Israel killed.
That's right. And the what amazes me when we keep going back to that is how ready they were with these lies, how specific, like these 40 beheaded babies, the mass rapes. These are all, they were all ready with these lies, and it's sort of like, what else are they ready with? Like, and how how people can keep repeating these without any evidence is.
Oh yeah, they still do.
Yeah,
they still do. On CNN, where the woman was like, "They are raping women."
Yeah,
and it's like, okay, show me one. Just give me one.
And there was a report or some kind of comment by I think one of these Israeli groups about the latest round when they produced this report, and they basically were arguing that you shouldn't ask for this much evidence because it's such a bad.
Just take our word for it.
Yeah.
Just trust us.
Yeah.
Just trust us. I know we murdered all of these people and starved babies and shot people in the back. It's like, but that baby was dangerous. You need to take our word for it.
Yeah.
Okay, sure. But do you? Let me ask you this in more of a widespread question. Do you get the sense that they're accomplishing the objectives?
Oh yeah.
I mean,
so I also don't. So among the casualties of this genocidal 2 years that we've been living through, I think is the concept of objectives. It's very unclear to me what they even want now. There is some kind of pathological behavior where they just keep going. So an objective is something where once you accomplish it, you stop.
Yeah, but Greater Israel seems to be that objective.
Right. Greater Israel, but Israel has never set its borders, right? Israel has never declared its borders. And so, they have this map of Greater Israel that they wear on their arm patches apparently now. And it's like, if they got that, why would they stop there? The outer borders encompass most of Iraq, lots of Saudi Arabia, all of Jordan, all of Lebanon, all of Syria, part of Turkey, but lots of Egypt, of course. If they had all that, they would just keep going because they don't have a way to stop, and they don't have. They're not operating on these kinds of calculations. I think that's one reason. For if we can say that the resistance, led by Nasrallah in the past 2 years, miscalculated, I think what they miscalculated was the rationality of the enemy. I think that they thought that Israel wouldn't expose the Israeli population to all of this destruction by Iranian missiles or by the Hezbollah missile force. I think they thought that they would ultimately want to do some kind of prisoner swap, however favorable or unfavorable, so that their army would know, that their people would know, that their government would do the fundamental thing that governments are supposed to do, which is keep them alive, and do the fundamental thing that armies are supposed to do, which is, take care of their soldiers. And so what they're on now, can they accomplish their objectives? No, they can't, because they have set a rolling objective to exterminate everybody, to dominate everybody, to silence everybody who talks about it, to put in jail everybody who opposes them in the West, to control all political parties, all political discussion, silence all campuses. No, these are not achievable objectives. They're not achievable objectives, and they can do a lot of damage along the way, but they are going to until they're stopped, which is why, again, I hope that the powers in the world, the rising powers in the world, that are not the United States, understand or come to understand this. I don't think they understand this now, but I hope they come to understand that that Israel in particular is not going to respond to diplomacy or peace initiatives or discussions, that they will continue until they are stopped from the outside.
Militarily, what do you mean economically?
All of those things are together. There's I don't see a separation between those things, because I do think that for example, like when I think about the Israeli economy right now, the Israeli economy is being completely propped up by the West, right? By the US. Yes. More, and I think it's invisibly so. Like, I don't think we'll ever, or for a long time, for decades maybe, know just how much the numbers that people give of like US giving billions. I don't think it's billions. I think it's tens of billions or hundreds of billions. I think essentially everything that is being done in the Israeli economy is ultimately being paid for by Americans, and Canadians, whatever, to a lesser extent. But I think it's total subsidy. I don't think there's anything actually being produced or any value being produced there. The only value being produced there is, the destruction and mass murder. That's what they're doing. They're taking materials produced in America and they're dropping them on the people of Gaza and their other neighbors. So their economy will never be normal, and an abnormal economy can exist for a while, but it's also like an economy is a place where people work, where people have jobs, and where people do exchanges. And that kind of, again, I believe that the kind of society that they've become is so bizarre, that's held together by the desire to murder children and commit these atrocities, that I don't believe that can exist indefinitely. I believe it is falling apart, and it's a question of how long it'll take. And then when you think of, like, one of the reasons that it'll never normalize is, for example, the fact that Yemen will never stop sending a couple of missiles a week their way, and there'll always be this tension with Iran, and there'll always be resistance to what they're doing in Lebanon and Syria. And even if they have this dream of getting this total submission of all of their neighbors, but there will always be resistance, and the costs of that go up and down, and at some point they can easily become unbearable. So I don't know. I don't see the short-term prospects are really bad, especially for Gaza, and but the long-term prospects for Israel, I don't even see how it could continue. I don't anymore.
It keeps going. Just to make this point plain, I know we don't see this much as specialists now, entirely reported in the West, but right here, Cradle, Esteban's outlet, they do fantastic work. Around 80,000 Israeli soldiers are reportedly receiving treatments for injuries sustained since the start of the war in Gaza, according to figures cited by, I guess it's Yedoth, from Israel's Ministry of Defense. Of these, 26,000 are being treated for psychological disorders, PTSD, because, when you're shooting babies,
Yeah.
you kind of feel some kind of way about it, right? Israeli media has described the surge in injuries, suicides as a crisis threatening the military system. And what's wild about this, also the number of deaths, I would wager to you that many of these deaths aren't suicides. These are, they don't want to own up to the fact that Hamas has been increasing the number of people they've been killing. And I haven't entirely been able to figure out why. Like, meaning, okay, I could be wrong. Maybe they are considered suicides. Either way, there's been a large surge of troops of the IDF that have been getting killed by Hamas. They would come out of bunkers. They would throw bombs on tanks. I mean, just astonishing stuff that these guys were doing in regards to still pursuing the war aim. Obviously, it's not enough in the sense that you have a resistance group fighting a nuclear power, which is why I always cringe when they call it a war. It's not a war, it's a massacre. You have a resistance group, for all intents and purposes, that is fighting a proper, fully backed military, backed by all of the powers of the West. And as you point out, given tens of billions of dollars to maintain their economy as they pursue genocide. And so these things are not equal. And, you get the sense that they were feeling themselves. It's like, hey, look at all these women that we killed. We are fantastic. Our ego is great. And then they go into Lebanon. And it's like, oh, we were able to do this with the pages. This is fantastic. And then they fight a proper military and get crushed. And then they go back to Lebanon. Okay, let's go back to this.
There's some kind of search for a win, right?
Yeah, right. Right.
And that, the West Bank is even better for that for them, which is like, they already have a. Yeah, go ahead. Sorry.
No, please finish. I'm sorry.
Well, and being able to search for a win, the best way to get a win for them is to fight somebody who's already surrendered, which is why they're going for these wins in Syria, and they're going for these wins in the West Bank, because the West Bank, you have the Palestinian Authority basically backing them up, doing any operations that they can't do. You have total intelligence penetration, and they're just continuously raiding these towns in the West Bank. But even with Gaza, like you said, if the more troops they send to occupy Gaza, the more of those troops are going to be killed in these resistance operations. That's how it's been for the past couple of years, and there's no reason to think that'll change.
Yeah, give me your take on this idea of the Palestinian Authority. Mahmoud Abbas is a humiliation walking. And, he shows up every random blue moon. But effectively, the Palestinian Authority is these allegories to Nazism is very similar in many respects. Nazis used to have Jews help running and managing the ghetto, just like you could say the Israelis, Zionists, have the Palestinian Authority effectively helping running their ghetto. And they're asking, effectively, they're saying, look, you need to give up all your weapons. Mahmoud Abbas will say, hey, you need to give up all your weapons. You dirty, filthy animals, give up your weapons. Talking about in the West Bank. Talking about in Gaza. And they are trying to craft this faculty, I don't know what it is, of using the Palestinian Authority to somehow govern Gaza with the notion that all of the weapons are given up. Now, again, they lost the election in Gaza. Mahmoud Abbas and the Palestinian Authority is hated, even by its own people. And yet, this is something that they're pushing. It's the point of pushing this because they know it would never be accepted. And just one last point. Hamas has over and over and over again said that they would give up the hostages. Israel just doesn't want to accept any kind of deal in this case. They just want to keep going. It's like a deal. There's no deal that they can accept. But they keep pushing this as a potential, quote unquote, solution. Give me your take on that. I mean, I guess this
Yeah,
provides a
well,
better
this
breakdown of
this
how
goes back
things
to your earlier question, because this question of occupation, again, the concepts of humanitarian aid, which is supposed to be impartial, it's supposed to be demilitarized, and the Gaza Humanitarian Foundation,
right.
Genocide Foundation, violates all of those principles. They created these death traps where they kill 100 people a day, replacing the UNRWA system, which worked for decades. And so humanitarianism is gone. International law is gone. The courts are gone. Diplomacy's gone. And but like, we need to look at the word occupation, because in history, when you have had occupation, the paradigm, I think, of occupation whenever people talk about occupation is probably like post World War II, right? I think that's what they're talking about, is the Americans and Russians and French and British occupying Germany, occupying Berlin, and dividing Germany into zones. So then they put down all these rules about what occupying powers are supposed to do, the responsibility to the civilian population, the importance of, and the occupier is supposed to leave after everything is set up. So all of that is like, they say that those are the laws or the international law around occupation, but it was designed specifically around how these other white countries were going to occupy Germany. Let's not fancy foot around what this actually was about, because the scramble for Africa, colonialism in Asia, the genocides of the Americas had already happened long before these laws about how the international law of occupation was specified. But just like a few of the assumptions here behind the law of occupation, the occupying power is not allowed to starve the population. The occupying power is not allowed to deny food and medicine to the occupation. The occupying power is not allowed to. The occupying power, people always point out, has no right of self-defense against the population, right? You cannot claim self-defense. Armed resistance to occupation is a right under international law. Here's the thing. Occupation assumes that there's some kind of land, buildings, society, right? It puts on limits on what you can do as far as policing goes, what you're allowed to do as an occupier. But talking about occupying Gaza now, that the Israelis have dropped 8 Hiroshima equivalent nuclear bombs, that now that the Israelis have destroyed 90+% of Gaza and are now bombing the tents that people have set up, and then bombing the bombs, the craters that they've bombed. The whole concept of an occupation now it has become quite strange. That's what I'm saying. Like, that's what it's the Israelis are motivated now by pathology rather than objectives. What are they occupying? They've made it into a complete moonscape. The aerial photos that came out yesterday or the day before, when they say the Israelis want to build beachfront property, like, there was beachfront property before October 7th. There were beaches, there were resorts, there was all kinds of wonderful things. The Israelis destroyed it all. Now, like, is there some Israeli way of building all of this that is different from the Gaza way? When the Israelis stole Palestinian homes in 1948, they stole the whole home. They stole the entire home. They sometimes stole the food that was on the table or in the cellars. They stole everything. That's what they're doing in Jerusalem now. They're doing that in the West Bank. They steal people's homes. They steal the physical infrastructure. What they've done in Gaza is something very different. They've destroyed everything. They've destroyed all of that infrastructure. For them to occupy it, they would have to rebuild it. And rebuilding it is trillions of dollars. That's a project, if it's on the assumption that it's going to be Palestinians rebuilding it, it's going to be a project that Palestinians are sponsored, by probably other Arab countries, other countries of the world. It's going to be a project that takes a long time, decades maybe, and maybe trillions of dollars.
Yeah.
You know, I don't even. It's totally unfathomable. So when they say they're going to bring back the Palestinian Authority to rule this, it's totally.
Makes no sense.
It's a total disconnect. Maybe in 2023 you could have talked about that, but what are they exactly talking about occupying now? Who's going to occupy that? Who's going to be the subcontractor in charge of that? What we're talking about now is the only thing that makes sense to happen now is the Hamas demands. That's it. The Hamas demands are the Israelis withdraw, they open the crossings, they exchange their prisoners for Palestinian prisoners, and they allow the rebuilding. And like I think that's the only way this is going to end. And I really mean by that if they decide to do this, keep doing this in Gaza for 5 more years, they're also going to do it in the West Bank, and they're also going to do it in Lebanon and Syria.
It's
and
not
so on.
enough. Like, how do you go through all of this only to go back to the standard? Like, I just can't. Like, think of the Ukraine conflict, for example, where Russia's like, yeah, we've given up 120,000 people over the course of this entire war. Ukraine might have lost maybe 1 million, but let's just go back to normal. It's like, no, dude, you've invested too much blood and treasure. Something has to change.
Yeah. I mean, I think you're talking about like the so-called right of Israel to exist. Like, if you can forfeit the right to exist, it would have to be by committing these kinds
genocide.
of crimes.
Or at the very least, like, let me ask you this. So, if in your wildest dreams, could you conceive of a one-state solution? Because I don't see a two-state solution come to fruition.
No. This is the two-state solution. This is like, whenever people say like, what about a two-state solution? This is the two-state solution. It started in 1993 or whatever with Oslo, 91. Yeah. And this is what we're living. We're living the two-state solution. This is the state that Israel designed, that the Palestinian Authority agreed to. And this is what happens when you have a two-state. This is what the two-state solution is. So a one-state solution. So there's a principle. I can't remember the name. There's an Arabic name for the principles. And I saw this circulating a couple of days ago. And the idea of it was, there is going to be one state of Palestine. Jews will be welcome there if they're Jews who were there before, not settlers who came from Eastern Europe or Western Europe, but rather the Arab Jews. The Arab Jews from Palestine will always be part of Palestine. They will always be welcome. And when the Zionist settlers came, they massacred those Jews just like they massacred the Christians, just like they massacred the Muslims. So, I'll try to look it up. Maybe while we're talking, but or while if you want to have a little rant or something, I'll look it up so people can know. But it was this document called the principles, the principles of revolution or something, and it's apparently like a consensus document that's been around for a long time. And the idea is that everybody lives together. There's no like religious discrimination, anything like that. But it's one state and it's Palestine. The settlements are gone. The IDF is gone. The Israeli Air Force bombing everybody is gone. Israel doesn't control the land or sea or air. Zionists don't control what Palestinians eat or where they go or anything. That's
they can go to Cyprus.
What's that?
They can go to Cyprus.
Yeah,
Cyprus.
Well, if Cyprus will sell, if Cyprus is really gonna sell them, Cyprus, like what can you do?
Yeah, that is the funniest thing in the world. They're like, "Oh my God, the Israelis are taking over." It's like, no duh, no duh.
Apparently, there's Greek cities too. I've heard. I saw something about like Greek cities also having this
Oh,
issue.
that is the funniest thing in the world. It's like, oh my God, look at what they're doing. It's like, dude, we've been watching what they were doing. Where were
They're
you?
doing exactly. What a shock that they're doing
Yeah.
exactly what they do everywhere else.
Yeah. I want to get to one more thing. This is concerning Syria for the moment.
Mm-hmm.
There is the belief, and I suspect the belief is right, that now that they put a terrorist in charge of Syria, that they're going to have Wahhabi death squads effectively attacking Lebanon, with the notion of weakening Hezbollah, at the very least expanding Hezbollah, forcing it to fight on two sides. Is that what you're seeing on this? Like that, for all intents and purposes, al-Jilani is a puppet. I mean, well, obviously he's a Western puppet. They for God's sake, they had sanctions on the guy, and they just removed the bounty on his head. But
Yeah.
Is that how you see this unfolding? Because there was a weird meeting between the Russians and the new terrorist government, where you would think that the Russians will be in somewhat of a precarious position here, considering that this guy's effectively a tool of the West. Erdogan is a snake and can't be trusted. And yet the Russians are like, we're going to keep our military base there. And I understand why they want to keep their base there. I'm just saying it's fraught with, let's say, difficulties. Give me your take on this. What do you make of this?
I did manage to look it up. It's called the Thawabit. Al-Thawabit al-Wataniya, the Palestinian fundamental principles, Palestinian red lines, the right to resistance, the right to self-determination, Jerusalem is the capital of Palestine, the right of return. That's the Thawabit. Yeah. It's coined by the Palestinian National Council in 1977. So that's what I was thinking of. Okay, so now Syria. So the Syria situation. Yes, everything you said is right. But when a puppet of the West is, of course, true. Jolani, I remember reading when the fall of Syria was happening last year. There was someone who was talking about the system of prisons that the U.S. has operated in Iraq, where they had all these thousands of prisoners, and they tortured them and they broke them psychologically. And there's a whole story here historically of the way that imperialists will imprison people, and then when those people come out of prisons, they can find the right person who will serve them perfectly.
After being broken in that prison.
Yeah, exactly. And as a condition of getting out or whatever. And like a lot of the core of these people in Al Qaeda or ISIS, whatever Jolani were formed in that thing. You remember the Americans took over Iraq in 2003. Right. And they, what the first things the Americans do when they take over a place is make a prison. That's the most American thing to do. Right. That's the most, they did it in Afghanistan. They did it in Iraq.
Prison?
They do it before they occupy a place. In El Salvador, they have the prison, and they haven't even taken over El Salvador yet. So they're doing, the first thing they do is the prison. And then they use these prisons. The Israelis do it too. They use these prisons to produce the kind of person that they need to sustain the kinds of things that they want. So Jolani is that, but Jolani is not just a puppet of the West. He is such a great puppet that he's also a puppet of Turkey. And Turkey, everything that's happening in Syria, you've got to watch Turkey. You've got to watch Turkey. Because Turkey is absolute, what do you call it?
Snake.
They serve the West. Yes, they serve the West, but they also are unreliable to the West. They're not even a reliable ally to the West. So they have these agendas. Ultimately, I think they serve the West, but they do a lot of ambiguity. They do a lot of perfidy, and they try to keep a relationship with the Russians. I think our mutual friend Laith Maroof and I see eye to eye on the Russian
Yeah.
issue. Russia in the Middle East is not a solid ally of.
Oh, so you and Lath agree on this one.
Oh, yeah.
Interesting. Interesting.
Absolutely.
The Russians will deeply disagree with you, by the way.
Obviously, obviously,
Yeah.
but like, you know, it's to me. It's devastating. It was devastating to see that, and it's a devastating conclusion for me to come to, because as someone who follows the history of the Soviet Union, but the Soviet Union also was pretty unreliable as an ally. They were one of the first countries to recognize Israel. So Russia also has a special relationship with Israel, and Putin has said this many times.
Yeah.
The alliance that Russia had with Syria exempted Israel. It had a free, Russia said, okay, listen, we will protect you, Syria, with our air defense umbrella from ISIS, but not from Israel. If Israel wants to bomb you, Israel can bomb you. We are not involved in Israel bombing you. And so it's the stupidest alliance. It's the stupidest protection, because if you have coordination between ISIS and Israel, then ISIS can just say, hey, Israel, do you mind doing the bombing? Because Russia's not protecting Syria from that, and we'll do these other things.
But did Syria have its own air defense? I mean, it wasn't like Syria didn't have its own
old air defense was provided by the Soviet Union, right? Syria's air defense, when they tried to upgrade it, they were trying to get Russian systems, and Russia did give them some systems, but Russia gave them systems and operated those systems basically to prevent the Americans from providing the air force to enable Al-Qaeda takeover. By the time of last year, Syria's air defenses had been degraded by continuous Israeli attack, and the army collapsed for a whole bunch of reasons that we still, I don't think, necessarily know, but I do think that Russia made some kind of deal with Turkey, and that has a lot to do with it. The sudden and inexplicable collapse of the Syrian military.
I cringe at that.
I'm sorry. I know. I cringe too, but I had to come to that conclusion.
I cringe at that argument for a very basic reason. It's not in Russia's interest to lose Syria. Meaning,
they kept what they wanted from Syria. They have those ports. That was all they really wanted. That's all they wanted.
As you pointed out, Erdogan is part of a NATO nation. Erdogan flows with the wind. He is going to Ukraine in the next week or so to basically tell Zelensky, we need you to win the war, we back you in this war, and all of this other stuff. Erdogan flows with the wind. He's a member of NATO. And so the idea that you're going to say, hey, I'm going to give up this relationship that we've had over the course of the last 50, 60 years, however long, and we're going to trust Istanbul to ensure that our ports remain intact.
Yeah,
that's outrageous.
Russia can hurt Turkey, but Turkey can hurt Russia. So Russia's not interested in, Russia and Turkey have the most fraught for centuries. They've had the most fraught relationship, right? And neither of them want to fully alienate the other. So they were continuously negotiating these things.
But if Turkey could get an advantage, it would take it. And
they did.
It did hurt the Russians to lose Syria.
Yeah.
I mean, that's why they were, So Istanbul did have the capability of damaging Russia. I mean, if they opened the Black Sea, for example, to NATO countries, that would hurt the Russians. They do have the capability of doing so, is my point.
Yeah. I agree. But again, this is kind of like the theme of our discussion today, which is the circumstances in which you make a deal. So I don't think Russia, I don't think Russia loved having to make this deal with Turkey, but I think they did. I think they did make it, and I think they probably tried to. Maybe they made a deal to. I don't think anybody's seen Assad,
No.
But maybe they made the deal partly to save Assad's life or something, to prevent him from being strung up. And
Well, see, the way Lath talks about it is that they absconded him.
They never let him go back. Which, again, it's total within the data points that we have. It's very possible to me, what he describes, because we didn't see him back in Syria. We saw him go to Russia, and then they said he was in Russia.
Yeah, he became a dentist or something like that, or picked up on whatever he was doing.
There was no
The Russian,
video
just to be
statement.
clear, the Russian point of view is that, look, we were defending Syria. The Iranians were defending Syria, but Syria wasn't defending itself. And the troops effectively started to melt away.
Yeah.
And there is no way we can defend a country that is not going to defend itself. That is the argument they make.
Yeah, I know, but why did a country that defended itself for 15 years just suddenly stop defending itself? Why?
Attrition. Attrition. I mean, you had a situation where the troops were getting paid very little. You had the oil that was being stolen, the wheat that was being stolen, economy that was in shatters. And you had Assad, who, for whatever reason, like many of these leaders, decide they want to make deals with monsters. And he gets closer and closer to some of the other Arab states. And he gets played for a sucker. That's
yeah, it could be. It could be. Like I said, there are lots of stories that fit. That one seems to me to be very self-aggrandizing for Russia.
Yes,
it's just like, we did nothing wrong. It was the Arabs' fault.
I'm not saying they did nothing wrong.
Yeah,
I'm just saying.
And you know, I don't know if you watch Nima Al-Khorshid and Alex Craner was on there. He's a Croatian guy. He's like,
yeah, he's great. He comes on the show all the time.
But he's on your show too. I probably watched him on your show now. But he early on, like when Syria was collapsing, I think Nima asked him, like, what do you think is going on? And he was just like, look, I was in the Croatian. I think he was in the Croatian army or something. He was just like, if you have any experience in the military, the idea of not fighting because you haven't been paid, that's not a thing. No, like a military is like, we go and we fight. Like, so the argument that they hadn't been paid in a while and that it was financially dysfunctional, like they were at their posts, they had their weapons, they would have fought. Like what it looks like is they were given orders to retreat, and they were continuously given orders to retreat until it was too late to do anything, and they were more or less following their orders. So something really sneaky happened there. Something really sneaky and sinister happened in the collapse of Syria that we don't fully know. But I think to me, betrayal by allies makes the most sense.
Okay. Fair enough. Yeah, Link and I argue on this also, right? Yeah. So no, I'm fascinated by it. And Daniel Kabalik, he's going to write the book on Syria. So I'm super eager to see what he puts in that book on how he believes it collapsed. Justin Mann, thank you for this. Justin Podur, he's host of Anti-Empire podcast. I'm sorry, Anti-Empire Project podcast and YouTube channel. Definitely check him out. I really appreciate this, and I really want you to come back so we can continue.
Yeah, anytime. Thanks. I love your channel, man. I'll keep watching. I'll probably turn this off and keep watching right now.
I appreciate that. You have a good one, okay? Be safe.
Okay, take care, man.
I see my man in the background. I see him. I think he might be smoking a stogie. He's smoking a stogie. Right on. Michael Maloof. How you doing, my man? You doing okay today?
I'm good, thank you. How are you?
I'm doing okay. Glad that you could join me. Better better now that you are with me, I should say. Michael Maloof. He's a former senior security policy analyst in the Office of Secretary of Defense, author, regular contributing analyst on RT and other media outlets. He has nearly 30 years of federal service experience in the U.S. Department of Defense. Michael, I'm going to tell you something that's going to shock you. I have come to the conclusion that you may be right about something. I've come to the conclusion that you might be right about something.
Well, so, thank you. I'm
humble. So listen to this. And this is not the only clip where Trump has said this. And after a while, you're like, what? And this is going to make it very difficult for Trump to get any kind of deal if he's not given reality. So this is one of the exchanges that took place between Trump and the press. I am continuously fascinated by this idea of, I never heard that.
Thank you, calling me. Thank you, Mr. President. On Ukraine, President Zelensky just signed a law allowing for citizens age 60 and above to serve in the military. We've seen dozens of videos of young men being hauled into vans and dragged to the front lines against their will. And we've even seen videos of a young man with Down syndromes serving on the front line. You, when you campaigned, you said you wanted to see the people stop dying. A lot of people admired that statement. Now the people dying are elderly, mentally handicapped, and conscripts. So even if a ceasefire doesn't work out, why should Americans continue to fund a foreign military that's scraping the bottom of the barrel of its population like this?
Understand very importantly, this is Biden's war. This is not my war. I'm here to get us out of it. It's a mess, and I'm here to get us out. I haven't heard that when you say about 60-year-old men and et cetera. But this is Biden's war, and we're working very hard to get us out. I stopped 5 wars in the last 5 months.
I can stop at that point because he's saying absurd stuff. But he continuously says, I never heard that. I can play you 2 or 3 different clips where Trump's like, I didn't know that. I never heard that. Nobody said that. That's no excuse. Because if you keep going to these press conferences and looking incompetent by saying, I never heard that, it looks like you should fire the people who are around you, who's telling you or misinforming you. But I think
he's purposely not being told by his intelligence service.
Agree.
They're very very pro-Ukrainian. They're only feeding him the narrative that suits their agenda, and we just got to understand that and accept that as reality, and go on from there, because this is a one-sided thing, and they basically are setting him up for failure.
But he hired these people.
That includes the neocons and the intelligence people that brief him on a daily basis. He's not getting both sides.
I accept that. But he hired these people. And how many
I can't help that. I'm just telling you what is. It's not. I can't do anything about it. I can only bring it out. It's up to the American people and pressure to be put on him from the outside. I can certainly bring it to people's attention through media, but then it's up to them to do something about it, and it's up to him. And if he wants to keep these idiots around that have their own agendas, and he also has to cater to his contributors.
Right.
So he's not his own person as he likes to think he is.
It's not that I'm saying you have the power to do anything about it. I'm trying to point out that Donald Trump is culpable either way. If he wants to go to one press conference after the next and sits there and say, I never heard about that. And again, I can show you like 5 videos where he's like, I never heard about that. I didn't know that. I didn't know that. And it's like, dude, how do you how either you have a point of view that you want to run with, and you hire people around you that are misinforming you on purpose, and they're doing that. Otherwise, I don't know the other alternative on that. I don't get it.
I suspect that the neocon Radcliffe, who heads the CIA now, who helps prepare his presidential daily brief, the PDB, has something to do about that. I mean, he's not getting it, and we saw it the first time I saw it was when he was on the tarmac, and he wasn't aware that drones were being lobbed into Russia.
Right.
But he was getting the information that Russia was sending missiles into Ukraine, and he flat out said, "I didn't know. I hadn't heard that." Well, what do you mean you hadn't heard that? You have the best intelligence service in the world, purportedly, and yet you didn't hear that? I mean, everything is very surfacey with him. It's all very superficial. He doesn't get into any in-depth, and he has no expertise on any one thing. He just rides everything superficially. He has to cover a myriad of issues anyway, and so he just accepts what he hears from the last person he spoke to. That's what you're dealing with, and I've seen it. We continuously see this.
Yeah. Can Trump still
accept what is?
Can Trump still claim that it's Joe Biden's war, from your point of view?
No. It's clearly getting to be his now. He could stop the arms tomorrow. He could say that's it. He could say I'm finished with this. Russia and Ukraine will just have to duke it out, And if the Europeans want to get into it, that's their problem. I'm not getting involved. I have issues. I have problems back at home I have to deal with, pressing problems I have to deal with. And he does. He has a myriad of pressing problems he has to deal with at home. And if he wants, but then to continue sending arms and what have you, and raising the ante, cutting out, dropping out of international agreements, longstanding international agreements that we've had to try and lessen the international tensions. But that's all purposeful. He didn't have to do that. In fact, he should be extending for example, the intermediate missile treaty. He should be extended. Instead, it's by dropping out, he's now created a further problem in Russia now moving its medium ranges closer to their borders, which threatens all of Europe. And that didn't have to be if the treaty was still in existence.
Yeah, that's what I was going to next, actually. So 1987, I believe, was the date. Soviet Union, Ronald Reagan, Gorbachev made the Intermediate Range Nuclear Forces Treaty. And this was limiting certain missile systems, ground-based, that were going to be used, including nuclear missiles. I mean, you can tell
and it limited their distances as well.
Exactly. Well, that is over with. Donald Trump pulled out in 2019 under the tutelage of, I would say, John Bolton and the people who were around him. But Putin or Russia stayed with it for the next several years. That is now over with. At the time that Putin
It was just announced,
right? But I don't think it's a coincidence that the Orezhnik missile mass production that Putin announced was only a few days before this was just announced.
Right.
And just to be clear, like the audience need to understand the gravity of this. Russia's
very serious.
Yeah, we're free to take any measures. We're free to do what we want. Some of the analysts were saying it could hit California. Give me your take on this, on the gravity and severity of this that the Western media doesn't seem to be latching onto.
It's mainly a threat to Western Europe and to our assets in the Far East, wherever he can put missiles. The continental United States is not threatened by these medium ranges. They would be threatened by the intercontinental ballistic missiles. But that's one treaty they want to keep in place. But the intermediates are more serious, and that didn't occur until the announcement that occurred just yesterday by Russia that they were now going to start moving these things. It did come right after Rezhnik was announced of going into production and into operation, but that was due to the fact that the United States has been moving its defensive missiles and offensive missiles into Europe and into Asia. Now, the critical thing is not just the missiles alone. It's the type of launcher. It's the Typhoon launch platform that can launch either a defensive or an offensive missile. Right. And that's what is being deployed into Europe and into Asia by the United States. And this is what is causing consternation in Russia. Now, the excuse used by Bolton to drop out of the intermediate treaty in the first place was, well, it's just between the United States and Russia. It doesn't, and they violated it anyway, which the Russians vehemently denied, but we've never seen the evidence that they did. It was never shown to the American people what the violation was. But now you have other countries, China, Iran, Pakistan, India, all now have their own intermediates. So the treaty needs to include those countries if it's to be effective. But if Russia and China, if Russia and the United States are not cooperating in that arena, you're not going to get those other countries to come on board under any circumstance. Yeah. So it's best if we renew relations with Russia, get that back on track, and start developing some confidence and trust again. Try to regain some trust and what have you, and confidence that the relationship can work, given that we are both very strong, serious, strategic countries, and maybe the other countries will want to become part of it and be in an exclusive club, if you will. I mean, it depends upon how you market it, and try to lessen the world tensions, because right now, this minute, they're higher than they've ever been.
Yeah, 10 seconds to midnight. Do you see that taking place? I mean, again, Donald Trump is not even being one or two things. Either he's not being honest about what's taking place in the world, or he's not being aware of what is taking place. Neither of those things allow you to engage. Like, for example, when Trump first got in office, he says, look, NATO expansion is a problem. We should have never gotten into the war with Ukraine. This was always the red line. It's like, okay, he's acknowledging reality. And if you're acknowledging reality, that at least makes me think that you are trying to meet the other person halfway. Claiming that 120,000 Russians were killed this year and Ukraine only lost 8,000. You're like, what are you talking about?
Yeah.
Like that, it affects your point of view if that's what you actually believe when you're going.
Well, that's the mantra. That's the mantra from the people who feed him his information.
Exactly. Yeah.
This is the problem.
Yeah.
And he needs to be an independent thinker, but he's not, even though he claims he is. I'll make the decision, the ultimate decision. But look who he's surrounded by. He's surrounded by everybody who speaks from the same choir book, who sings from the same choir book. You know, it's crazy.
But
they're all yes people.
Yeah, do they accept the gravity of what Putin just did? Like when they're talking,
they're not acting like it.
No, they're not.
They're not acting like it, and it is much more serious. Look, the warning time now for Europe will be less than 8 minutes if Rezhniks are used. Each Rezhnik carries 6 MIRVs, 6 missiles, independent missiles, either nuclear or conventional. So if you shoot a swarm into London of, let's say, half a dozen, that's 36 high explosive ordnance going off at the same time. You cannot defend against that. They're hypersonic. That means they go Mach 10 times the speed of sound. We have no defense. Europe has no defense. Now they're trying to develop a defense. They're trying to develop the certain platforms like THAAD and Patriot to try and deal with it, but it cannot, because it cannot deal with the maneuverability of these hypersonics. That's what makes them different from a ballistic missile, which just goes up and then it comes down, and you can project what the trajectory is going to be. Right. With Rezhnik and these other hypersonics, they can move around, and as a consequence, we have no defense against that yet.
So it's a cat and mouse, ain't it?
It's terrible. This is terrible. And the full impact of the threat and the implications of this are not being realized because of all the other distractions we have going on in the world. But this can really set off something. So if it could really set off a much larger war, especially now if the United States continues to wants to send in long-range missiles to Ukraine for Ukraine's use, and the Europeans continue to want to send in items for to continue the war. Now Trump claims, well, I can control the NATO leaders. Well, get them to stand down.
Yeah.
Stop this war and force both sides to sit down and negotiate. You know, call Putin. Call Putin's bluff. Say, okay, I have ordered Zelensky to halt all shooting. The Europeans are not going to be supplying anymore. Now, when do you plan to get together and negotiate and work this out? Otherwise, I'm out of it. That hasn't happened.
I don't think Putin is bluffing on that, though. I think he would.
No, he's not bluffing. He's going to stay the course. He's going to intensify over the next few months. And he's made it very clear what his objective is. He doesn't want the whole country,
Right.
but he wants to be able to protect the Russian-speaking areas. But as long as Kyiv wants to continue the war, and Zelensky has received encouragement to continue the war, but you see, Trump is not getting that message. The Europeans are encouraging him to continue the fight, not to sit down and negotiate, because they want to continue feeding him missiles and other ordnance to continue the war. And why Trump doesn't get that, I don't know.
Do you think they think Putin is bluffing?
No.
No, meaning the European leaders? Because during the Soviet Union, and I'll let you go after this, during the Soviet Union, there seemed to be a level of respect that's just not there now, where there was an understanding that, okay, we could end the world could end, and we don't want to do that. So let's not do that. I don't see that in the European leaders. I don't see that in the political establishment in America. I don't see it. I see it in Russia, where they're like, dude, we're doing everything in our power to not have a war with NATO, whereas you are taking provocative action over and over and over again. This was one of the last straws. I mean, it seemed that Putin was holding out the potential for some level of negotiations, which is the reason why he stuck with the treaty for all of this.
He's been restrained.
Yeah,
I think he's been restrained, and so I think that this is going to be, unless the Europeans stand down, and they don't give any indication that they will. And I don't know why they want to continue this war. They have nothing to base it on. They're broke. Their economies are a wreck, and they can't afford to rejigger their economies for wartime production. They don't have the means. And so consequently, I think they're expecting that if their backs are against the wall, the United States will somehow bail them out. Well, news alert, the United States has run out of ordnance itself. Its own stockpiles are down. It'll take years to replenish. So I don't know what's going through their minds. You have the people of these countries that are really against this war continuing. But on the other hand, you have the elites who want to continue the war. There's a break in communication between the people and their leadership in the the so-called democratic countries, which are no longer democratic, by the way.
agreed. Thank you for this, Michael. I really appreciate it.
You bet.
Maloof.
Thank you.
He is former Senior Security Policy Analyst in the Office of Secretary of Defense, author, and regular contributing analyst on RT and other media outlets. He has nearly 30 years of federal service experience in the U.S. Department of Defense. You have a fantastic rest of your day, man. Thank you for this once again.
You too. Thanks so much.
Michael is fantastic. I agree with him on this one. They don't seem to be taking this seriously with the gravity it deserves. And over again, they act as if Vladimir Putin is somehow bluffing, that he's not serious, that, oh, if we just get America into it, Russia would just stop. And dude, you're not getting the memo. That is not where their head is right now. Every step that has been made, let's say from the standpoint of pragmatism, has been taken for weakness. And, you know, whether you're talking about Syria, Iran, or for that matter, even Russia, and it seems that they've gotten to the mindset around the way I'm thinking about this, in the sense of like, if you're Iran negotiating with monsters, it's pointless. If you're Russia negotiating with monsters, it's pointless. They're at your gates, they're at your door. They're knocking with blood on their thumbs or blood on their knuckles. And how do you engage with flagrant habitual liars who are claiming that you have 100,000 people that died this year in that Ukraine, who's been losing ground left and right, only lost 8,000 people. They gave them more than 8,000 people back in regards to the refrigerated dead bodies that Ukraine didn't want to take. I mean, for God's sake, it's absurd. So it's like, how do you negotiate with people who are looking at the world in this kind of jaded, warped context? Because again, like I kept saying about Iran, if you are going to continuously lie and make it as if continuously escalate your demands and continuously use this notion of nuclear weapons, this is why we're doing this, then they're lying. And they're lying for a reason. And they're not lying for a reason of getting a deal. You could have gotten a deal. Iran was open for a deal. It's like, hey, we're selling hot dogs. It's like, oh, we want to buy a hot dog. And it's like, well, now we have steak. I don't want steak. Look, that's all we got now. Like, meaning they kept changing the terms of any kind of negotiation, any kind of deal, in the way that made it very, let's say, slimy. And of course, the policy papers effectively backed it up with which path to Persia. So, yes, I get very cynical when people are lying to me. I get very cynical when I see the line. That is a telltale sign that these people are not being serious. And in this case, I think Russia has also seen this. I will tell you this, though. I remember Mark told me one day that Putin has a propensity to want to make deals. And there's a speech that Putin gave. And, Maloof made the point of saying, well, he should put Putin on the spot and saying, okay, Zelensky is not going to fire anything. The Europeans aren't going to do anything, etc. What are you going to do? Are you willing to end the war? Putin has said over and over again, it feels like a broken record because it feels like they're not listening to what he's been saying, and what they've been saying has been consistent for the same 3 years. If you remove your troops from these areas that are now part of the Russian Federation, if you acknowledge that you would not be part of NATO, and on top of acknowledging you would not be part of NATO, I'm sorry, I'm doing two things at once. I'm trying to set up for Marandi. Marandi is going to be on at 10 o'clock, and he's going to join us for about 30 minutes to discuss Iran's new Security Council that they've established. The only reason they would establish that is they're preparing for war. It's the only reason they would do it. Otherwise, they would keep the same configuration that they have now. I'm curious of what Marandi has to say about that, on whether or not they are preparing effectively for another assault and attack. Give me 1 second, and the war will be great. By the way, KJ No is coming up. What time is it? It's coming up like 3 or 4 minutes. I'm sorry, it's a live show. I don't have a producer. I have to do it all. All right, let's see. Okay. Let's do this first. Let's go to chat, because I want to thank the people who donated. Jamal, he is literally calling you Monkey. Barack, yeah. We have trolls. Trolls are just kind of part of the process. I put him in timeout. I haven't seen him since. He didn't have the stuff in him to come back after a timeout. Sheena Nolan, thank you very much, Sheena. Deeply appreciate it. Again, I keep saying the show is often demonetized. Your help helps the show keep ticking along. Also, the people who donate through Buy Me a Coffee, the people who donate through Patreon or PayPal, thank you. I often don't get the opportunity to tell you thank you because I'm going through chats. But again, you are also appreciated. You help keep this show going. Whether it's a like, whether it's a share, whether it's a chat, membership, PayPal, Patreon, super, all of those things are beneficial to the show, and you have my deepest appreciation for them, honestly. And we have, what is this? Bansa W. Bandit. Warwick is the man. Warwick is good. Warwick is good. Warwick gave a fantastic breakdown of the economic realities of the states. And look, this book, Peter, I think Turchin is his name, Index, is fantastic. One of my audience members recommended it, saying, hey, could you get this guy on the show? And I did. I looked up a little Wikipedia spot for it, or whatever that is, like the little blurb, ad blurb. And when I checked out the book, I binged, listened to that book for 2 days straight. I finished it this morning. Hooked. Just hooked. It's terrifying, but it's rational. Like, it's a... Do you know what psychohistory is? Anybody that's ever watched Dune? Not Dune, Foundation series, Asimov. Harry Seldon had this process called psychohistory, where you couldn't necessarily tell what people would do on an individual basis, but over large groups of people, you could come up with a math that would allow you to dictate, not to dictate, but to infer behavior. And you could see these things over the course of history, currents, in the way that historical groups of people have moved, and the way it moves into the future. And so if you're looking over the course of an eon, 500 years, 200 years, 100 years, you can see changes in the way that your society effectively functions. Now, in the Foundation series, this created an issue with the emperor because Harry Seldon was like, your government is going to collapse. It's, what do you mean this government is going to collapse? We've had this government for like thousands of years. I can show you in math that this is going to collapse. All right. What the author is doing is not psychohistory, but you can kind of see kernels of it. And the point that he makes is that every society that has had an excess of elites crashed because those elites created a wealth pump that will pull money and resources, creating an immiseration of the working class, of the poor, etc., and pull that money to the top because they would take policy that was in their best interest as opposed to policy that was in the interest of the lower class. And they would give the lower class propaganda as to why it is okay for them to do that, why they are so fantastic, why they deserve this much money, why they deserve that house, why you should get food stamps, why you shouldn't get healthcare or education. That they would take that stance and that they would effectively take it to the max because they had the capability and the power to take it to the max. From a standpoint of the immiserated class, the class that took that hit, that was dying younger, that was shorter in height. And by the way, these were stats that were coming from America, where you could see at one point in America where people were taller, one of the tallest in the world. People were healthier. People, you didn't have this infant mortality rate. You didn't have people dying 5 years younger. And you can tie that stuff to A, the political system, but B, to the well-being of the population in a particular society. And you can see all of those stats for America getting worse and worse and worse. It is a fascinating book. And looking at the historical context, where you can see country after country after country go through the exact same boom bust pattern and collapse. And the point that the author is making is that America is A, an oligarchy or plutocracy. That is not a feeling. That is the literal definition of the way that America is structured. That there are so many elites that what you end up with is a series of people who want to be elites that can't break into that elite division. And so they're frustrated elites in want. And those frustrated elites in want uses and harnesses the power of the immiserated class in order to effectively overthrow the ruling order. And he could show up over and over and over again, country after country after country after country. And the speed of that depends upon whether or not the political structure can cobble itself together to deal with that immiserated class. Oh, it's so good. This book is so good. That book is so good. I want to bring in my guests. We are joined with the man himself, KJ No. KJ, how are you doing this morning? You doing okay, man?
I'm doing well, thank you.
Oh, thank you for joining me. KJ No, he's a journalist, political analyst, writer, and teacher, specializing in the geopolitics of the Asia-Pacific region. Once contributor to the book, Capitalism on a Ventilator. It is now available at iacenter.org. I'm sorry, KJ, something entered my mind at the last minute and it just threw me off. Thank you for joining me this morning, man. I am so glad. I always enjoy these conversations. You sent me a link. And it's called, Witch Hunt. Mm-hmm. Effectively, the way that the Trump administration is going after the Chinese and American universities. Well, obviously, it's going to create a brain drain, if nothing else. And by the way, one last point on this before I get your take. I saw this woman, she said, in the old days, it was in vogue to be Chinese and be more Western, and go to American universities and get an American job. And she says, thank God I didn't do that. She says, that is not the point of view today in China. She said it is a very different mindset, a very different point of view. They look at themselves as being involved with a certain amount of confidence. And the Russians would say the same thing, by the way, that there's been a confidence that's been attributed to them being able to win that war. And these callbacks to the Great Patriotic War, when China's economic sense, and it's like a science sense, it's a sense of their society growing and evolving in a way that is not necessarily true in the West. Am I getting that right? Or do you agree, disagree with that, by the way?
Yes, I think you're absolutely right. And it's a general trend, not just in China, but around the world. Before, if you were growing up in the global South, this was the great dream. You work hard, you study, you achieve academically, you go and study in the West. And some people would settle and other people would, have careers, and then they would come back and be valorized. And I think that is pretty much out of the picture these days. If you go to the United States and you come back to China, having an American degree doesn't confer any special prestige, doesn't confer any special benefits. It simply means that usually it means that you were not good enough inside of the Chinese academic system to get ahead, because the Chinese academic system is very meritocratic. It's very, very competitive. And also, some of the best research now is being done in China. So the fact that you went abroad doesn't necessarily confer any prestige or advantage. And Chinese are realizing this now. And then also, they go to the West and they realize, what a failed state, what a complete immiserated, failed state it is. And they often, before they go to the US, for example, they're very pro-US. And then when they, leave the US, they say, I've been sold a bill of goods, and they're, thoroughly disenchanted. So I think that is a general trend, not just in China, but around the world.
Well, you point out researching why Chinese is dangerous, and that these two researchers in University of Michigan were taken as basically that they were smuggling as agro-terrorists. Am I getting that right?
Yes, they were not charged with agro-terrorism, but that was the framing of the statement of the Department of Justice. They were charged with smuggling and conspiracy and making false statements, etc. But essentially, what happened was that there was a researcher. Her name is Yunqing Jian. And she was arrested, and she's currently being held without bail and potentially facing 20 years in prison for smuggling this common fungus called Fusarium graminearum. Okay. Now she's a researcher on this fungus, and this is a fungus that causes food blight. And she's one of the key researchers who's doing research in the United States to prevent damage from this fungus. But because she, had a sample sent from China to her, or tried to get a sample from China into the United States, the U.S. is claiming that is alluding that this was an act of agro-terrorism, and that she was trying to affect the food security of the United States. Now, this is about as rational as saying that, as charging you, Jamal, you go to a gym and they charge you with bringing in athlete's foot, right? I mean, the place is crawling with athlete's foot. The notion that you brought athlete's foot into the place is absurd. And it's the same thing with Fusarium graminearum. It's prevalent everywhere in the United States. This is why Jian is doing research trying to prevent it. And most people think that it actually originated in North America. So this notion that she was smuggling something dangerous into the United States in order to undermine the United States is an absolute absurdity. Like I said, it's like, charging somebody with bringing E. coli into Chuck E. Cheese, right? I mean, there's E. coli everywhere in Chuck E. Cheese. That's just how it works. So it's an absurd charge, but it is also very, very deadly and dangerous, because what it signals is that there is once again this incredible escalation of persecution against Chinese, and in particular Chinese researchers. It means that they're all, suspects, spies, potential agents of the Chinese Communist Party, and that we have to go after them. So this is really, if there's any terrorism, it's really a kind of political or academic terrorism against these researchers, to scare the bejesus out of them and everybody else. And, like I said, I cannot emphasize enough that she was actually trying to prevent a blight from this food crop fungus in her own research. She's trying to help the U.S. And so this is how she gets treated. The other person is Chen Shuanghan. She faces, again, 20 years for sending roundworms and plasmids on filter paper without proper permits. So why didn't they use proper? Yeah, I mean, people say, well, why didn't they do it properly? Why didn't they go through all the proper channels? But the thing is, these are minor process errors. People do these kinds of things all the time. Graminarium is not on any list of potential, bio agents. It's not on those lists. It's simply a process violation. She didn't file the paperwork because she was possibly trying to cut corners. But what most people don't understand is almost everything you do in the United States is a potential crime. From the moment you wake up until the moment you go to sleep, you have probably committed between 2 and 3 felonies if they decided to, apply everything on the book at you. So you just can't get away from it. I was stopped going through customs once because I had a box of chocolates, and they said that I needed to declare the box of chocolates because they were agricultural products. And that's technically true. I mean, if you take those peanuts that you got on the plane and you put them in your luggage and you walk through customs, you've broken the law, because those peanuts are agricultural products and you actually need to declare them. But who does that, right? I mean, nobody. So this is how it works, So it is a witch hunt against these Chinese researchers. And the message it sends is that all Chinese are targets. And the larger message that it's sending is that the Chinese are dangerous and they're dirty and they're, deceitful. And this is why we are escalating to war against them. It's part of the hybrid war against China, the information war that is the subkinetic justification for the war that is coming.
Yeah, it's denigration of a group. I mean, the whole China virus thing fits within this context. I don't think they get, though, that they are creating a brain drain in the United States where less and less, I mean, I could be wrong, but some of the top universities in AI, mechanics, science, etc., are Chinese. And some of the top people are Chinese. And whereas you have this kind of open country where people can come in and do research and everything else, that is no longer the way we are regarded around the globe. We are creating a brain drain out of the United States into other countries where those countries or people in those countries effectively stay where they are. That is to our detriment. That is to our detriment. I mean, the reason why we call, Lady Liberty, bring us your poor, tired, huddled masses and all of this other stuff, that's because we wanted that potential of intellect and everything else. And that is not where we are today. I agree with you, KJ.
Yeah, so this is something that the US doesn't seem to realize or seems to have forgotten. This is being done, this is happening at the University of Michigan. And I reached out to several of their faculty members. Nobody responded to me. There's a petition done by Code Pink in support of these researchers asking for the University of Michigan to step up and defend their researchers, who haven't, they haven't committed major crimes. These are just minor process errors. And there's a petition that Code Pink has put out asking for the university to do the right thing. But if you look at the university statement, they're saying, well, we want to make sure that we comply with the law, and we are going to make sure that, all of our, staff are properly trained on that. So not a one word of defense of, of their researchers. Now, this is a fundamental error because the US used to be a scientific powerhouse.
Yes.
Is no longer. Okay. That title has actually gone to China. If you look at the top 20 academic institutions for research, 16 of them are Chinese. If you go onto the ASPE website, ASPE is a China Hawk think tank which tracks many things, but they also track technological and scientific rankings, and they say China is the cutting edge in 57 out of 63 cutting edge scientific and technological pursuits fields. And so China is way ahead at this point. US has a few remaining areas of strength, but it really doesn't anymore. And you can see this coming because what the United States has done over the years, but certainly in the last half a century, is that it has not only deindustrialized the country, but it's also de-skilled its workforce. When I say de-skilled, it has essentially destroyed the system of higher education or education in general that would allow people to think critically, to think rationally, to learn important and critical fields of knowledge. All of that has been cut out. And essentially we have, as I said, I don't want to harp on it, we have a country which is led by lawyers, who are essentially people who tell stories to themselves. That's what the theory of the case is. It's like, it's storytelling. It's like building a narrative. So you have people who know nothing about science and math leading the country, along with some businessmen, mostly unsuccessful businessmen, failed businessmen who are also leading the country. And on the other hand, you have the global south like Iran and China, where the country really focuses on science, on having a scientific leadership, of having a scientific approach to leadership. And that is creating this fundamental gap. And it's important for the United States to understand that the scientific accomplishments of the United States were largely driven by immigrants. In the 1940s, the US got a whole bunch of Nazi scientists, Operation Paperclip. In the 50s, they got a whole bunch of Hungarians. They call these the Martians, people like John von Neumann, who invented, the modern computer. You had, and then you had waves of Asians, including, hundreds of thousands of Chinese. Go to any engineering department, look at who you see. I mean, it's mostly Asians. If you look at the math Olympiads, it's like the US says, well, we recently did well in the math Olympiads. Look at who the faces are. They're all Chinese, right? So the US has kind of extracted the intellectual, just as the US extracts the labor and the value from the global south, it also extracts the cognitive labor and the cognitive laborers from the global south. And it's lived high off the hog because it's done this continual extraction or brain drain. And now it's completely reversing that because it doesn't realize, it thinks that, it's born on third base and it thinks that it hit a triple, right? It doesn't understand that these are, millions of people from around the world, millions of scientific workers, researchers, engineers who have actually pushed the US to this, pinnacle of, technological, achievement. And now all of that is reversing. There's a reverse brain drain. The Chinese are no longer staying here. And when you have situations like what happened to Jan and what happened to Han, people see that and they say, U.S. is not safe. I mean, we know it's physically not safe, but scientists tend to be idealistic. They tend to believe that, we do good science for everybody. We add and contribute to the global knowledge commons. This is a benefit for humanity. And we just do that and we'll be okay. And they're completely misguided. They are targets as well.
Yeah, the political space doesn't care about that, only in so much as you can use whatever they come up with as a weapon or science. Like, it's astonishing. That was the US's strong suit, believe it or not. Like this idea of, we would take all of these people who are foreigners and coming into this country and they can contribute. And you're going to get some people who don't contribute, but it's like anything else. There are going to be noise in their signal, and we want the signal. And the signal is a benefit to the entirety of the country. They've turned that on its head because it's not just these two women. That Chinese woman in Canada that they picked up, the
Meng Wanzhou. Yes.
The people in, I forget the other universities where they deported. Like, this stuff is outrageous. Like, and you look at other countries who say, okay, I don't think that's safe. I don't think it's safe. I mean, I look at Europe and think the same thing, by the way. When Europe evicted those people out because they were covering Russian topics, or the way that they are trying to shut down the information space it's like, okay, Europe doesn't seem safe to me for what I do for a living. That's not a benefit to your society. So, KJ, agree. One last point before I let you go.
Jamal, Europe has been swept with violence and irrationality for centuries upon centuries. And one of the, worst, forms of irrationality were the witch hunts. And, what we're seeing right now is an academic witch hunt, and it's a redux of the older McCarthyite Red Scare witch hunt. But even that kind of irrationality comes from the older European witch hunts. The European witch hunts were horrific. They lasted over 400 years. Somebody would have something bad. They would accuse one woman. They would torture her. Usually it was a poor working class woman who would be tortured until she confessed. And not only did she have to confess, but she had to point and accuse other people. And so then you would get entire communities who would be condemned. So cities in Germany like Bamberg or Würzburg, they would execute. And when I say execute, I mean burn at the stake, 900, 1,000 people because of these witch hunts. And very, very often the starting point of this witch hunt was crop failure. For example, in Bamberg and Würzburg in the mid-1600s, the grapes died on the vine and the corn was damaged, etc. And this was actually caused by a minor climate shift. That there was like a minor ice age that was happening in Europe at that time. And so that would cause early premature, crop failure, and crops would freeze, etc. And when this happened, then they would look for a woman, a poor working class woman, accuse her of consorting with the devil and having, Black Sabbath and using witchcraft to damage the crops. She would confess, and then she would point fingers, and then it would just expand from there. But note two things. One is the sheer and utter irrationality around this, which really, really plagues Western culture, for millennia, and certainly for centuries during this period. But also the second piece of it is the starting point, which was crop failure. And if you look at the allegations against Jan, they've literally made, allegations that she's trying to destroy crops. And so this is a very, very deliberately crafted piece of propaganda, and it has the potential to really it's a powerful piece of propaganda. So it's very, very dangerous. So the result of this is the U.S. is creating a reverse brain drain But they don't realize that. The Trump administration, the Biden administration, they don't understand that because they are not scientists, don't do science. They believe they create their own reality, and they don't understand that they're actually constrained by the laws of physics and chemistry, etc. So they don't believe that. So that's problem A, because they're just, lawyers. And then the second piece of it is that as you create this foundational brain drain, you accelerate the processes both of disintegration and decoupling, but also, you're pushing the West into the Dark Ages. During the height of the Cold War between the Soviet Union and the United States, Russian or Soviet researchers and American researchers collaborated. For example, the polio vaccine was developed together. But we're at this point in time where the relations are even worse than the relations between, the Soviet Union and the U.S. at its nadir. And so that gives you a sense of how, polarized and dangerous this moment is. And of course, the ultimate, plan is to blow everything up, is to go to war. That's the destination. That's what we're facing. And these are just preliminary shots over the bow.
Yeah, but you would want. We weren't always that way, though. Like this country, like the notion that we were bringing Nazis, Werner von Braun, in order to build our rockets. That's bringing in a literal Nazi because it's an advantage to you because you recognize science, technology as being one of the main primary fields of advancement of society. I don't know what the hell these people are doing. Like it's such a degeneration, like from where the U.S. was with all of its flaws and everything else. This is such a degeneration. Like these sociopaths who've taken over are not the brightest people. I agree with you. They're lawyers. So reality is malleable, despite the fact that reality is not malleable in real terms. This is what we get. We'll see. It's like, we'll see how that turns out. We'll see how that turns out. I do not think it's going to turn out well.
Jamal?
And what I mean over time, by the way. But give me a take, KJ.
Yeah, I mean, this is what happens under monopoly capital. Okay, let's say you and I play the game of Monopoly. Eventually, somebody wins, right? And they get monopoly. This is how monopoly capitalism works. In fact, monopoly was designed to teach people about the dangers of capitalism, but people took it the other way. Notice when you play Monopoly, somebody gets to have a monopoly eventually. That's how the game ends. The second piece is there's this constant issuing of money to the players, right? And this is like the way the Fed has to print money. You pass go, you get $200. This is how it works. But eventually, even with that, cash stimulus, one party gains the monopoly. Now, what happens under monopoly conditions is, as we've said before, you get deindustrialization because you have the people who are working, they're so immiserated, they cannot buy the products that the corporation is making. So on the one hand, and this is where the term oversupply really comes from. It nothing to do with China because China doesn't function that way. But you have a monopoly corporation, it's building products that cannot be absorbed because there's no demand for it, because the workers who are working for the monopoly are so immiserated that they cannot buy what the corporation is selling. And so under those circumstances, what do? You move into financialization. This is why, as I've said before, when you go onto DoorDash, if you can't afford your burrito, you can pay for it in 4 easy installments, right? That $20 burrito, too much, can't afford it. Pay for it over time. You can pay for it in installments. Same thing with Apple. Same thing with GM. GM made more money at one point selling loans than it did selling cars. It was for a moment there. It was a financial company with a car manufacturing department, right? So everything gets financialized, and financialization means that you're simply making a claim to other people's money. It's simply money claiming money. It's dead capital controlling living capital. It's money that has control over people's labor, future labor. And so when you have that deindustrialization, you get the financialization. But the other thing that happens when you deindustrialize is you get de-skilling. People are no longer trained or taught how to do skilled work, whether it be cognitive work or manual, industrial skill laboring. They're not taught these things. So, for example, in California, the electrical grid is going to go down because we don't have enough linemen to do it. You have to train an entire generation of linemen to maintain the lines. There are not enough young people going into the trades learning how to become linemen, and all the older guys are retiring. And this is skilled work. Anything involving industry or infrastructure is very skilled work. It all takes training, but if you don't do that training, then people lose that capacity. A society loses that capacity. Now, the other piece that's added to this is that in the 1960s, the universities were hotbeds of rebellion, and one could say almost revolution in the 1960s. What was the response to that? Well, there are documents that lay out a plan to discipline the university. But one of the plans was make university so expensive, so burdensome, so shackling that no one will even think of rebelling inside the university or after the university. And so then you see these massive large loans that you have to take out. You have to take out massive debt in order to get what in most countries would be considered just a normal education. You have to take out massive debt. If you take out massive debt, what does that do to you? First, it constricts or restricts the kind of disciplines that you can go into, right? You want to go into something that offers rapid remuneration, because if you go into a field where you can just think and explore, etc., you are going to be in deep doo-doo when you graduate. You are not going to be viable. So it either directs people into very, very restricted fields, or it makes those fields only available for people of means who already belong to the ruling class. Right. So then once having done that, when you're in university, you are highly constrained. And then when you leave university, you're even more constrained because you have to hit the ground running, start paying off those debts right away, as fast as you can. You better start working. Don't even think about trying to change society. The best you can do is, maybe get a nonprofit job and go into the nonprofit industrial system, which is still more of the same. You're still yoked, you're still controlled, you're still managed. And so this is a way of managing and controlling society so that you don't have these massive upheavals like you saw in the 60s. A university is a site of resistance and contestation. Traditionally, it's been that way for thousands, well, at least 1,000 years. And by clipping out, the critical capacity of a university to reflect and challenge a society and possibly improve it, you've created a situation where you're essentially, you've cut out your society's capacity for critical thinking and critical engagement, and you've burdened all of its potential energized and deep thinking and idealistic youth with the burden of immediately becoming drones for capital. And under those situations, you are not going to have a good society. Everything can only go downhill from there. One of the key markers of a failing society is the breakdown in its educational system. Once education is gone, everything else follows from that. And we're just seeing, we're in the mid phase of this. So the university has been destroyed. The neoliberal university destroyed academic education itself, and it's been overrun with administrators who are essentially rent-seeking parasites inside the system. And in the meantime, they try, and they've been staunching that with constantly getting cognitive laborers from this global south. And now they've decided to cut that off as well.
KJ, thank you for this, KJ. You always have my appreciation. You're always a great speaker and explainer of the stuff, and my audience loves you to death. I love you to death. Thank you for this. I'm going to put this link, by the way, to your video that's discussing this below the video,
right,
just so the audience can see it for themselves. It's a big deal, man. I mean, like it's an obvious downhill that they don't seem to either acknowledge or, for that matter, want. So I'm going to KJ know. He's a journalist, political analyst, writer, and teacher specializing in the geopolitics of the Asia-Pacific region. He's contributed to the book, Capitalism, One Better Later, once censored by Amazon. It is available at iacenter.org. You can find KJ on Breakthrough News Network on the China Report. And like I said, I'm going to put it at the bottom of this video when I cut this video. KJ, man, you always have my appreciation. Thank you for this.
Thank you. Always a pleasure, Jamal.
Absolutely. Be safe. All right, let's bring in my next guest. We are joined, let me see, let me get this right. Let's, I think I need to flip this, share this, and got it. And get rid of this part. Perfect, there we are. Professor Marandi, how are you doing today?
I'm very good, Jamal. How are you?
I'm doing well. Thank you for joining me. I always appreciate your you joining me, just so the audience will know, even though I think the audience already knows who you are. Professor, there it is, Mohammed Marandi. He's professor of English literature and Orientalism at the University of Tehran. Yeah, thank you for joining me this evening. So the reason why I brought you on had to do with a story that came out that Iran is forming a Supreme Security Council. And this is fusing, I guess, various elements of the security apparatus in Iran together to deal with security threats. Am I getting that correct?
Well, Iran has a Supreme National Security Council, and we have a new chair for that council. It's Dr. Ali Larijani, who is a professor at the University of Tehran, but he was also the Speaker of Parliament for 3 terms, and he was previously the chair of the Supreme National Security Council before.
Okay.
And he is, I think, a very competent person and a very good choice for this job. And I think it will be very good to have him in charge of this body. But within the framework of the Supreme National Security Council, you will have this council, and it is a smaller, let's say, group of people.
Mm-hmm.
And I think it's basically so that they can make any military decisions or key security decisions in time of war or in time of conflict or in time of threat of a conflict. They can make those decisions more easily, but also with greater secrecy. So within the framework of the Supreme National Security Council, you will have this council, this military council, and the president will be the head, of course. And my understanding is the chair of the Supreme National Security Council will also be chairing that, although I don't know exactly yet, but I think that's what will happen. And then you will have a small group of people who will be sitting together to make those decisions.
This puts me in mind of kind of like an allied command of sorts. But usually they form those things because they're prepared for conflict. Is that where Iran's head is now? And by the way, when I saw this, I thought this was a great idea. And the reason I thought it was a great idea is because you guys do have threats. And I understand that the government initially wanted to negotiate and everything else, but the reality of it is they weren't willing to negotiate. What Iran seems to have said, and correct me if I'm wrong on this, is that if Trump wants negotiations, then they need to compensate Iran for the damage that they did in the sneak attack as one of the, let's say, primary starting points for any negotiation. And there was one of the things, no attacks, which I don't know how Iran could ever accept again from the United States. Am I getting that right?
Yes, that is something that the foreign minister said. Although I would say, Jamal, that a lot of what is said online and what analysts are saying about how the current president and administration, they want to appease the Americans, I really don't think it's like that.
Please.
I do think that, yes, they are in general more towards, let's say, their general history, the history of the last couple of decades has been more moderate towards the West, more sometimes trusting towards the West. But I think that President Pezeshkian is very skeptical of the West. Sometimes he says things and then people take that, and instead of using the body of his speeches, he said so many other things, and then he is not a very careful speaker. He's not a professional politician. And so at times he says things that I think are not useful or not helpful, but that's not representative of what his position is, some of the things that are put out there. I mean, for example, the people who are calling him, attacking him harshly, they said that his interview with Tucker Carlson was a catastrophe. I understand, I accept that his interview was not 100%, and I think he should have been more assertive when it came to speaking about the U.S. government.
Right.
But he was speaking to an American audience. He was speaking to a Tucker Carlson audience. And he wanted, I think, to show them that it is not the Iranians who are aggressive. It's not the Iranians who are the problem, because the Americans are propagandized. I have nothing to do with his interview. I have nothing to do with his presidential office and his entourage. But I don't think it was that catastrophic. I think it could have been better. Definitely, some of the criticisms were valid.
Yeah.
But I don't think it was like terrible. So in Iran, you have these sort of extreme positions that some people take for or against the government. I think that at the moment there, and especially after the war, there is a consensus in Iran that we cannot deal with the United States in a sense that we can trust them or have an agreement and expect them to abide by that agreement, and expect the United States the U.S. government to recognize Iran's rights. So I would say, in general, the politicians in the country are far more skeptical of the United States today than they were, let's say, 3 months ago, and that includes the president. But the position taken by the foreign minister recently, the one that you alluded to, shows that Iran is taking a tougher position. But at the same time, Iran does not want to close the door to negotiations. And we discussed that before.
Right.
There are two reasons for that. One is, of course, there's always a chance where something may happen. So you don't want to close the doors. And because of our skepticism, by the way, we do not directly negotiate. We indirectly negotiate with the United States. But the second is that if the United States carries out an attack, or if the Israeli regime carries out an attack, or does something outrageous or foolish, no one can blame the Iranian government for not trying to prevent this from happening.
Yes.
And that was, I think, so when Trump sent a letter to Ayatollah Khamenei for negotiations, it was a very insulting letter, and he rejected negotiations. And then when the Americans sort of shifted, he allowed for indirect negotiations, but not where the Americans wanted to hold them. The Americans wanted, I think, the Emirates to be the mediator, and he chose Oman.
Right.
And that caused Americans to, it put them in a dilemma. And it took them 2 weeks to respond and agree to negotiations. So we were not playing on the American or on Trump's playing field. We were playing on Ayatollah Khamenei's playing field. Indirect negotiations, and it's Oman instead of someone else that the Americans preferred. And as those negotiations were taking place, the Americans and the Israeli regime conspired and assaulted the country, and that created a huge wave of support for Iran across the world. And of course, inside Iran, it helped strengthen national unity because it showed clearly that the United States was deceptive, that it was deceitful, and that it cannot be trusted. So I think that it was smart for us to negotiate, but not under those terms and conditions that Trump was seeking. And I think if there are going to be negotiations or indirect negotiations in future, it will probably be devised in that sort of way so that Trump will not get what he wants. And at the same time, it will make the United States look aggressive and dishonest if something happens in future.
I remember what the second provision was. It was, if you are still going with this idea of no nuclear enrichment, then don't bother with negotiations. Like effectively, you're going to have to pay reparations because you attacked us in bad faith. And two, if as a premise of the negotiations, you need to acknowledge that nuclear enrichment is built into this process. Now, I guess my thing is,
Jamal, yeah, and I think this war, although it was destructive and it was a unprovoked war, an illegal war, and the Israeli regime carried out a blitzkrieg like the German Nazi regime that it mimics. A lot of damage was done on day one in particular, obviously. But ultimately, Iran had the upper hand. And we saw, for example, how Trump was admitted that the Israeli regime was taking a beating, and how Steve Bannon said that the real story here is that Trump saved the Netanyahu and the Israeli regime because they were losing. They were taking a bad beating by the Iranians. But in addition to that, the U.S. strike on Iran ended up catastrophically. First of all, contrary to what Trump said and claimed that none of the missiles hit their targets in Qatar, they did.
yes,
And we have evidence of that, and that the strike was very devastating and costly for the United States. But more important than that is the fact that the United States and the Israeli regime gave Iran a gift. And that gift was a policy of ambiguity. From now on, the United States and the Europeans and the Israeli regime will not know what they would seek to know about Iran's nuclear program. Iran has expelled the International Atomic Energy Agency for good reason. And now it's unclear what Iran is doing. And Iran is being more careful in general about information nowadays. Things have changed, as we see with the Supreme National Security Council and the new way in which the decision-making process is being devised. So this policy of ambiguity serves Iran's interests. And in addition to that, this negotiation, the negotiations that Iran carried out within the framework that Ayatollah Khamenei devised, strengthened Iran's position globally. And so right now, while there was damage, they murdered hundreds of innocent people,
yes,
and hundreds of soldiers and public servants. That's obvious, and they destroyed. They caused a lot of material damage. They lost the war. The damage to the Israeli regime was greater, but more importantly, the image of the United States and the Israeli regime took a battering, and Iran has now this policy of ambiguity, which is a very important playing card to have.
why? And I'm asking seriously. Like, is it the belief? Well, yeah. I'll just ask it flat. Why do They believe it's a very important point.
Well, first of all, we don't even know what sort of, we don't know what sort of damage has been caused in Isfahan and Natanz and Fordo. And we won't know. And the Americans won't know. And the International Atomic Energy Agency won't. And they won't know if Iran is building new installations or where they're building. They won't know what Iran has or what new centrifuges, because a lot of the centrifuges in these facilities were like IR1s. They were very old centrifuges. Now Iran has much more advanced centrifuges. The industry has moved forward rapidly, and they don't occupy a lot of space, and they can be moved around very easily without being damaged, because the older centrifuges were very sensitive.
Mm-hmm.
But the newer ones, because they have sensors and the technology is, much more advanced, it's more easy to move them around, to enrich in smaller places. So now the United States has no idea what we have, where we have it, and what we're doing. And they brought it upon themselves by weaponizing the International Atomic Energy Agency, by carrying out illegal attacks on Iran, by the West and collective West supporting aggression against Iran and its civilian nuclear sites.
Right.
So that policy of ambiguity with regards to Iran's nuclear program makes it more easy for Iran to develop that program. And it makes the West it much more difficult for the United States and the West to formulate any sort of policy, whether it's political or whether they want to, let's say, again, think of striking Iran. It will be much more difficult for them to find targets and to figure out if those targets were damaged or not, or whether they struck the right targets. So that ambiguity, I think, is a big plus for Iran.
Yeah.
Remember, Jamal, before the war that the Israeli regime carried out, the 12-day war of aggression, Iranian public opinion was about 50-50,
Right.
according to polls, on obtaining a nuclear weapon.
Right.
And the reason why it was 50-50 was because the government policy and the state policy was not to have nuclear weapons. So a portion of Iranian society that was opposed to it was influenced by the dominant government discourse. When the government says, look, we don't need nuclear weapons, a segment of society will say, okay, then we don't need nuclear weapons. After the war, although the Iranian government position has not shifted that much, although increasingly they speak about, there's an existential threat against the country, we could develop nuclear weapons. And one of the people, by the way, who said that was the new chair of the Supreme National Security Council, Dr. Larijani. So the discourse has changed, in a subtle way. But because of the nature of the Blitzkrieg attack and the way in which the West supported the slaughter of people and the way in which the Western media supported this aggression, that itself has shifted public opinion. So now a strong majority of Iranians support developing a nuclear weapon. That's not the policy of the government. And I don't think I'm confident that the Iranians are not building a nuclear weapon. But the point that I'm making is that with this political force, these shifting sentiments among ordinary Iranians, and this ambiguity that now exists, and the statements made by senior officials, including the new chair of the Supreme National Security Council, that is something that makes what the actions of the United States and the Israeli regime harmful, extremely harmful for their own objectives with regards to Iran.
Agreed. Because what they wanted to do was create so much chaos that they destabilized the government itself. I mean, the attacks that they were doing were decapitation strikes to try to take down scientists, military, political. I mean, even going after Pezeshkian. and with this idea that there was going to be this upswell and this overthrow. And instead of doing that, they've solidified the Iranian political space and even increased the number of people that are saying, we need nukes. We need nukes to defend ourselves. Yeah, that's a backfire. It didn't work that way. Do you think we're in
So
World War?
not only do you, exactly, so not only do you have this shift in public sentiment and this ambiguity with regards to Iran's nuclear program, but you have a population that has hardened with regards to the West,
Yes.
that is much more united than before. You have a younger generation that was to a large degree influenced by Western narratives that have shifted in their political sentiments and become much more skeptical of the West, if not hostile, and definitely very hostile towards the Trump and the Israeli regime. But in addition to that, in addition to these elements, you also see this happening within the broader global context. The war in Ukraine is intensifying. The front line is collapsing. The United States is becoming more desperate in a way. I mean, the new threats made against Russia, and then 50 days going down to 10, 12 days, and then the 8th of August. You see the United States overwhelmed with multiple crises. You see the problems arising because of Epstein, which are not going to go away. And my belief is that we're going to get more information gradually come out, and this is going to become increasingly problematic for Trump. I mean, I'm not an expert on Trump, but it's quite stunning how nervous Trump has become, and how he's so adamant about just rejecting any debate on Epstein, whereas he's always been able to, I remember in the UK, the Prime Minister, Tony Blair, they would say he is Teflon Tony, and that nothing would stick back then. Of course, the Iraq War destroyed his image and credibility, but in general, they would call him Teflon. They often called him Teflon Tony. And Trump was sort of like Teflon. No matter what they threw at him, he always was able to, survive.
Agreed.
But his demeanor and his language was always very confident. But when it comes to Epstein, we see how he wants to shut down the debate, and that's different. And so in any case, the issue of Epstein is not going to go away. And then you have the Tariff War, and now the threats against India and Brazil, which really weren't primary targets
China
in the past. So this is, well, China, of course. But so now the Iranians see that while they have a stronger hand, as we discussed, but also the United States is in a much more difficult situation. And the situation for the United States is becoming increasingly difficult because it's antagonized so many global actors. So I think that makes the Iranians feel more confident, although there are many challenges. Some of my Turkish friends get upset when I say this. I love the country Turkey, and people, they are very hostile towards the Israeli regime, but I have no respect for Erdogan and the Erdogan regime for reasons that I've said before.
Yeah.
He has been working against the resistance. He's been cooperating with the Israeli regime. He transports oil. All that aside, in Lebanon, we're seeing the same thing, but the Saudis and the Americans and the Israelis are working together to put pressure on the resistance. So while there are challenges, and we see regional players in the American camp, Erdogan, Mohammed bin Salman, Mohammed bin Zayed, the Qatari regime, and among others, basically working to help the Americans. And so that is always going to be a huge challenge for the resistance. But we do see the United States, when we look at the bigger picture, facing bigger challenges. And the war between Iran and the Israeli regime, that strengthened Iran's hand. So when we look at the global situation and the way in which the war played out, despite the challenges in the region, I think it's fair to say that the position of the axis of resistance today is much stronger than it was a few weeks ago.
And the last question, what do you think happens with Israel? I mean, and do you think that requires a military solution in order to stop the genocide that's taking place? What do you think? Just give me your thoughts on this. I'm very curious, because when you talk to different people, some people would say there's going to be a reckoning. Some people would say there's not going to be a reckoning. Some people would say there will be one state at some point. Some people would say, no, Israel, there will be no consequences for the behavior that they've taken in regards to murdering all of these people and starving these people, especially with the U.S. support behind it. How do you think this ultimately turns out from your point of view? And I know you don't have a crystal ball, but I'm just curious. You've studied this stuff for years.
Well, you know, of course, it's impossible to predict the future, but I don't think that the Israeli regime will survive. I think it will collapse.
Now, why?
I'm not saying it will, I don't believe it. I'm not saying it's going to collapse in 1 month or 1 year or 2 years or 3 years. But the longer this genocide lasts, the longer this Holocaust lasts, the worse it's going to get for the regime. And now that they want to take the Gaza Strip, they're only going to slaughter more people.
Right.
And after 22 months of genocide, and it's been 22 months now, so we're moving into the 23rd month. After 22 months, Jamal, I mean, you were in the United States 22 months ago. Could you have ever imagined public opinion in the United States shifting the way it has when you used to work on your radio show? Did you ever imagine that the United States, which is the most propagandized country in the world by far, did you think that sentiments, even though social media is working to help the Israeli regime, mass media is working to help the regime, the state has helped doing what it can, but public opinion has shifted. And outside of the United States, you know quite well what's going on.
Yes.
We saw huge protests in Japan. We saw huge protests in Australia. We see, so across the world, the regime is despised, and that has enormous consequences. And if every day that this continues, when you have people being just slaughtered on a daily basis for trying to get food, and then simultaneously you have these apologists who are trying to pretend that there's no hunger and no starvation, they are getting discredited further. These Western officials and journalists on CNN or Fox News and elsewhere who are making, or the Wall Street Journal or the BBC, you know, those who've been trying to claim that there's no starvation, they're only getting discredited further. So the West is weakening, and the West is weakening because of, you know, the declining economy. I mean, Europe, look at Europe. They've destroyed their economy. They've shut the door to Russia. Then they refused to do a deal with Iran because of the United States. When we had those nuclear negotiations, I was telling European elites to do a deal so you can invest in Iranian oil and gas and make up for some of the losses due to your sanctions on Russia. But when the United States failed to take that last step, you know, I said, winter is coming. It's going to get bad for you. And it's been downhill for Europe ever since, for 3.5 years. And now they do this deal. Well, it's not a deal, it's a capitulation with Trump. And they have nothing. So, and as Europe declines, is that good for Israel or bad for Israel? It's bad for Israel, because the Israeli regime is not an independent regime.
Right.
It's completely dependent. You know, it's no superpower, it's no power, it's just a tiny stolen piece of land where Europe and North America and, you know, the West is pumping in weapons and money and technology so that they can continue the slaughter. Well, the Western economies are going downhill. They're losing wars. They've created trade wars. Not just Trump, but the Europeans are just as foolish. They went and insulted the Chinese. You know, they closed the door to Iran. They closed the door to Russia. Now they've closed the door to they're closing the door to the Chinese. None of this is good for Israel. So the West, which backs the Israeli regime, is declining. Its fortune, its support among the public in the West is disappearing. It's hated across the board, and you do see clips of Israeli tourists, traveling and people, confronting them. I don't see this regime as lasting, and I don't see these governments in the region that have been treasonous in continuing to do business with Israeli regime as being able to last forever, because the outrage in the region has just gone through the roof.
Yeah.
This is not a sustainable situation. We already see a lot of unrest in Egypt, and while the Turkish government is trying to push activists towards making protests against the Egyptians, but they too are complicit. And then there's Jordan, and then there's the Emirates, and then there's Morocco. But these governments or regimes that are in bed with the United States, they're being weakened by this continued genocide. So every day that this genocide continues, and then every day that the United States and the West continues to wage some form of war in some shape or form, whether economic or military war across the world, the fortunes of the West and the fortunes of the Israeli regime continue to decline. I just don't see this as sustainable. They will continue to slaughter women and children. Things will get worse in Gaza. They may attack Lebanon, because right now there's a conspiracy against the resistance in Lebanon. The Saudis are pushing, and the Americans are pushing the government to
civil war,
to confront the resistance and take their arms in order to make Lebanon weak, because the Lebanese armed forces can never stand up to the Israelis. And then Erdogan's ISIS and Al-Qaeda troops in Syria have already been used to attack Lebanon a number of times and threaten the resistance. So you see this large collaboration, this conspiracy right now taking place, where these different players under the authority of the United States are trying to target the resistance. So there are challenges, and there may be war, and the genocide and Holocaust will continue. But I just think that this downhill path that the Israeli regime is taking in the eyes of the world, and the weakening of the West in general, this is going to have consequences. And of course, as you know, Israel is deeply divided right now, not because half of the country is against genocide. No, overwhelmingly they support this extermination of Palestinians, but according to polls. But because this country is deeply divided between two camps. So there are many things taking place simultaneously. None of it is good news for the Israeli regime.
Professor Marandi, always appreciate you, man. Always appreciate you. One day I need to get to Iran. Hopefully we can get coffee or something to that effect.
Definitely.
Thank you for this. Professor Marandi.
Always a pleasure.
Professor Mohammed Marandi. He is Professor of English Literature and Orientalism at the University of Tehran. Well, wait, is that still correct? Do I still have that correct?
Yes, as far as I know, I have not been expelled from the university. So okay. As far as I know, I still work. Unless you have news that I don't.
I do not have any additional news.
If you have any inside information, please let me know.
Thank you for this. You have a good day, okay? Be safe.
You too.
Thank you. Bye-bye. All right.
Thank you.
I always appreciate these conversations with Professor Marandi. Yeah, I always appreciate those conversations. All right. We have come to the end. We have come to the end. Let me go to chats to do these first before we close it. Yes, he was calling me a monkey. Esperak. Racist people be racist. He's really, I suppose. Shini, what is this? Sheena Nolan. Thank you, Sheena Nolan. You have my deepest appreciation. This is Bansa W. Bandi, I believe that is. Warwick is the man. Warwick was good this morning. Warwick was very good this morning. He gave an economic breakdown. That was fantastic. What is this? Good morning from Richmond, Virginia. Sir Bikes a lot. How are you? You're an RVA. You're an RVA. Badass. Badass. I will be going back there someday at the point where this one or two things happen. Either my body gives out or I just get tired of being a digital nomad. Either way, I will be back in Richmond at some point, even if it's just my cold, dead corpse. Guys, I want to thank all of you. I want to thank all of you that contribute. You have my deepest appreciation. You allow the show to be what the show is and allow the show to keep ticking along. You can support the content, PayPal, Patreon, Super Chat, Buy Me a Coffee, Patreon. I think it's a Patreon. PayPal is one of the other ones. All of those things help, and you have my appreciation for it. I'm going to call this a day. You all have a fantastic evening, night, wherever you are. You be safe. And have a good one. Be safe, guys.